I now convene this hearing of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee entitled the GM Ignition Switch Recall Investigation Update. I thank my colleagues and our presenters for being here. Ms. Barr, when you were before this committee almost 3 months ago, you could not answer many of this subcommittee's questions about why it took General Motors years to figure out why the airbags and the cobalts, ions, HHRs were not deploying when they should have. It took GM years before finally issuing a safety recall. Now Mr. Valoukas has made public his report on the GM fiasco, in which he concludes there doesn't appear to be a case of a cover-up or a conspiracy. Instead, according to Mr. Valoukas' report, GM's failure to recall faulty vehicles was a case of incompetence and neglect. Perhaps this report should have been subtitled, "Don't Assume Malfeasance When Incompetence Will Do." I still have questions about whether GM employees knowingly withheld information during previous liability lawsuits, information that could have led to an earlier recall and prevented some of these tragedies from occurring. In many ways, the facts surrounding what finally resulted in the GM recall are far more troubling than a cover-up. GM engineers and attorneys who were given the facts, including reports on stalls and airbag malfunctions, and who were tasked with figuring out what went wrong, did not connect the dots. That's because they were either incompetent or intentionally indifferent. Today, I want to know from both Ms. Barr and Mr. Valoukas not just how it happened, but why did this happen. Even when a good law like the Tread Act of 2000 is in place, it requires people to use common sense, value a moral code, and have a motivation driven by compassion for it to be effective. Here, the key people at GM seem to lack all of these in a way that underscores that we cannot legislate common sense, mandate morality, nor litigate compassion. At some point, it's up to the culture of the company that has to go beyond paperwork and rules. The failures at General Motors were ones of accountability and culture. If employees do not have the moral fiber to do the right thing and do not have the awareness to recognize when mistakes are being made, then the answer must be to change the people or change the culture. That's a lesson another large organization under congressional scrutiny should have also taken heart. I hope officials from the Veterans Affairs Department are watching. What is particularly frustrating about GM is that the company appeared in no great hurry to figure out the problems with its vehicles. Despite customer complaints, reports from GM's own engineers that they were able to turn off the ignition switch with their knees during test drives, and finally reports of deaths, it was not until 2009 that GM figured out the airbags had any connection to the power mode status of the car. Then, it took another 4 years to link that finding to one of the components that determines the power mode, the ignition switch. And that discovery was not a result of GM's own investigative work, but raised in the course of a lawsuit brought by the family of a young woman who died behind the wheel of a Cobalt. How was this discovered? An investigator for the family simply took 2 ignition switches apart and compared them, something GM failed to do during over 7 years of investigations into the mystery of Cobalt airbag non-deployment. Ms. Barr, you sought this internal investigation of the ignition switch recall, and you have publicly acknowledged how troubling its findings are. Your company has cooperated with this committee investigation, and I thank you for that. You have taken corrective action by changing procedures and trying to remove roadblocks to make sure safety concerns come to light. Based on this report, though, there are no easy fixes for the kind of systemic, cultural breakdowns and fundamental misunderstandings that permitted GM engineers not to suspect a safety problem when Cobalts were stalling due to a faulty ignition switch. The possibility that these problems are pervasive and cultural deeply concerns me, concerns us all. We learned Monday that GM has announced yet another recall, its 39th since January. This one is hauntingly similar to the Cobalt ignition switch recall. The ignition switch in certain Buicks, Chevys, and Cadillacs inadvertently moves out of the run position if the key has too much weight on it, causing the car to lose power and stall. The model years for the recalled vehicles goes back to the year 2000. Mr. Valoukas, your report tells us about the engineering and legal findings with GM, but what it doesn't divulge is whether GM attorneys made conscious decisions during discovery in other product liability lawsuits that prevented the truth from coming out sooner and potentially saving lives. That kind of malfeasance should be the crux of a cover-up. I wanted to delve deeper into that issue today and find out if that occurred. A harder question to answer, and for you, Ms. Barr, to solve, is to why this happened. We know engineers approved a part that did not meet GM specifications. Why? Was it a cost concern? Was it a rush to get a car off the road? Was it just sloppy? When complaints were raised about Cobalt's ignition switch almost as soon as the car was on the road, why did the engineers not diagnose stalling as a safety problem? Again, was this a lack of basic education about how the car worked, or is it something less specific but more difficult to address? A culture that does not respect accountability and that does not take responsibility for problems. When investigations drifted for years, there seems to be little or no evidence to suggest that this troubled anyone. Some of this is undoubtedly poor information sharing and silos, and a failure to properly document change orders. But why didn't anyone at GM ask? We have known for years we have an airbag system that isn't working when it should. When are we going to do something about it? Ms. Barra and Mr. Valoukas, I thank you for being here today. I look forward to your testimony, and I now turn to Ms. Stiguette for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we're still trying to unravel the facts that led to one of the worst automotive tragedies of the last decade, and that's the installation of these faulty ignition switches in GM vehicles that we now have known has caused over a dozen deaths. These switches were bad from the start. They should have never been installed, and once they were installed, it became quickly clear to GM officials that something was very, very wrong with them. Disturbingly, the company left these unsafe vehicles on the road for over a decade. Mr. Valoukas, you've done important work describing how a defect known to GM employees for over a decade went unaddressed for so long. This report paints a troubling picture of GM's culture and commitment to safety that allowed this tragedy to take place. It describes engineering and investigative failures, a lack of urgency in addressing issues, poor communication within the company, and numerous other systemic problems. And, in the end, the company failed to inform customers and federal regulators of the deadly problem. But the report, unfortunately, does not answer all of the key questions. It does not fully explain how the ignition switch was approved without meeting specifications, and then how it was redesigned in 2006. It does not fully explain why stalling was not considered a safety issue within GM. And most troubling, as the chairman alluded to, the report does not fully explain how this dysfunctional company culture took root and persisted. The report singles out many individuals at GM who made poor decisions or failed to act, but it doesn't identify one individual in a position of high leadership who was responsible for these systemic failures. The report absolves previous CEOs, the legal department, Ms. Barra, and the GM board from knowing about the tragedy beforehand. This is nothing to be proud of. That the most senior GM executives may not have known about a defect that caused more than a dozen deaths is frankly alarming and does not absolve them of responsibility for this tragedy. Ms. Barra, while you are a new CEO, you have a decades-long history with GM. From 2011, you were Executive Vice President of Global Product Development, and the GM staff responsible for vehicle safety reported either directly or through a chain of command to you. At least one high-level executive who was working on solutions to the ignition switch problem reported directly to you. So while you may not have known about this defect, many people who worked for you did. The culture of a company is shaped by its senior leadership. They set the tone and shape the attitudes of the employees. They are also responsible for putting in place systems to foster transparency and ensure that safety issues are taken seriously. Those systems failed at GM. Today, what I want to know are specific answers to how the culture of secrecy at GM can be changed to encourage reporting of problems, not just structural management changes. I appreciate, Ms. Barra, the changes you've made at GM so far, but I think the jury is still out on whether we can have success in changing the culture. Last week, as the chairman mentioned, GM announced the recall of over 500,000 late-model Chevy Camaros, including 2014 model year vehicles, because of ignition switch problems. And Monday evening, just a couple days ago, another 3.3 million cars with ignition switch and engine shutoff issues were recalled, including Chevy Impalas that are currently in production. This means that this year alone, GM has announced 44 recalls affecting more than 20 million vehicles worldwide. Ms. Barra, this record reinforces the notion that the safety problems with the Cobalt and Ion were not unique at GM, and that the senior executives at the company, including you, should have acted sooner to resolve the company's culture. So now, we need to show the American public that the changes that have been announced will really address the long-standing problems at GM. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Barra is not the only one with work to do. This committee should get to work on legislation to address the findings of our investigation. And in these last few minutes, I also want to acknowledge the families who are here in the hearing room today and their beloved loved ones with the pictures on the back wall there. I know it's not easy for you to learn about so many things that went wrong at GM. You have my word that we'll do our best to make sure that this kind of tragedy will never, never happen again. And, Mr. Chairman, I know that we can work together in a bipartisan way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlelady's time has expired. Now recognize the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barra, we do all thank you for returning to the committee today, as you said you would. 3 months ago, we held our first hearing on the GM ignition switch recall. We asked a lot of tough questions, but we got only a few answers. I expect things to go differently today. We have the Valukas report in hand, and we have its words seared in our minds. Our investigation tracks with the findings of the report, a maddening and deadly breakdown over a decade plagued by missed opportunities and disconnects. Engineers didn't comprehend how their cars operated or how vehicle systems were linked together. The company believed a car that stalled while driving wasn't necessarily a safety concern. Investigators let investigations drift for years despite having proof right before their eyes that an airbag system wasn't deploying when it should have. And all of this existed in a bureaucratic culture where employees avoided taking responsibility with a nod of the head. Ms. Barra, you have said you found the report deeply troubling as well. I find it very disturbing and downright devastating to you, to GM, to folks in Michigan who live and breathe pride in the auto industry, but most of all to the families of the victims. The recall announced on Monday this week makes it painfully clear that this is not just a Cobalt problem. A new set of vehicles, including multiple Chevrolet, Cadillac, Buick models, are facing an ignition switch recall for the very same kind of torque problem that lurked for over a decade in the Cobalt and similar small vehicles, with fatal consequences for unsuspecting drivers, including 2 teens from my own community. Ms. Barra, Mr. Valukas, many questions today will focus on how and why this happened. I intend to focus on how we can make sure it never happens again. A culture that allowed safety problems to fester for years will be hard to change. But if GM is going to recover and regain the public's trust, it has to learn from this report and break the patterns that led to this unimaginable systematic breakdown. I want specifics on whether the changes you've already put in place really have made a difference. With the Valukas report, GM has provided an assessment of what went wrong. I want to be clear today that our investigation does continue. This committee has reviewed over 1 million pages of documents and interviewed key personnel from GM and NHTSA. While we're addressing GM's actions in response today, we will address NHTSA's part of the story in the near future. We don't yet have all the answers about what changes in our laws, the regulators' practices, or the company's culture would have prevented this safety defect from lingering so long or harming so many. But we're going to find out. Yes, we will. The system failed and people died, and it could have been prevented. I yield the balance of my time to Dr. Burgess.
I thank the Chairman of the full committee for yielding. We now know this is not an evidence problem. The evidence is simply overwhelming. It's an analysis problem. General Motors still needs to answer the fundamental question of how it missed all of these glaring signs. Indeed, failure to recognize the problems in a timely fashion may well have cost 13 people their lives. This report is deeply troubling. Maybe the most concerning aspect of the report is the simple recognition that while everyone at General Motors had responsibility to fix the problem, no one took responsibility. That's unacceptable for one of America's flagship companies and one that millions of us rely upon every day. Now, according to the report by Mr. Valukas, he offers 90 recommendations as to the problems and their failures that led to the ignition recall. I'm certain that all 90 are crucial, but really only one, accountability, and accountability that is not transferable, is crucial. If personal accountability is missing, as the report here suggests, then disastrous consequences will not only occur, they will reoccur and reoccur. Ms. Barrow, Mr. Valukas, I thank you for being here in our committee today. The Valukas report is a start. It's the first step to solving a problem by identifying it. I hope also there are some answers for many of us as to the effect of now the understanding of the problem and when the understanding occurred. Will this affect those cases that have already been litigated? How does General Motors bankruptcy affect its position on those cases that were previously litigated? And perhaps we can even touch on Mr. Feinberg's employment. Is he an employee of GM, or is he working for the crash victims? All of these questions need to be answered today, and I look forward to your testimony, and thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Ms. Schakowsky for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, the second on the failure to recall defective GM vehicles in a timely manner, and I thank our witnesses for being here. As I said at our first hearing on this issue, the families of the victims of GM's defective vehicles deserved better. GM failed you. We're looking at those pictures in the back of the room, and they need more than an apology. On June 5th, Mr. Valukas, who is well known in Chicago, where I come from, and well respected there, reviewed GM's ignition switch failures, and his report was released on June 5th. The report characterized GM as a company with a convoluted structure and very little accountability, a place where there was an institutional failure to communicate and coordinate both within and between different departments. There's a story today in Bloomberg Business Week about a whistleblower who apparently tried to bring these problems to the attention of the company and lost his job as a result. During her previous appearance before the subcommittee, Ms. Barrow repeatedly pointed to the importance of the Valukas report in addressing the many questions that she was not able to answer. I look forward to getting answers to those questions today. A question I raised at our last hearing has yet to be answered to my satisfaction, and that's how GM will compensate those who were injured or who lost loved ones in crashes prior to GM's bankruptcy in 2009. Ms. Barrow said that it would take her and Kenneth Feinberg, who was selected to advise GM on options of how to establish a victims' compensation fund, up to 60 days, from 30 to 60 days from the time of the first hearing to determine how to proceed with those claims. That first hearing was April 1st, and it's now been 79 days, and so I hope we'll get the answers today. As Ms. Barr said, when the Valukas report became public, quote, "We failed these customers, and we must face up to it, and we must learn from it," unquote. While 15 GM employees have been dismissed, it's not clear to me that any senior-level manager has been held responsible for the GM corporate culture that allowed the ignition switch defect to go unaddressed for years after it was first discovered in 2001. The question now is how far accountability extends at GM. As Executive Vice President of Global Product Development, Purchasing and Supply from 2011 until taking over last year as CEO, Ms. Barra, my understanding is, was responsible for safety issues at the company. The Valukas report suggests that senior management at GM was unaware until 2013 that serious questions should have been asked about the ignition switch defect. However, 2 newspapers, including the New York Times, addressed the ignition switch defect in 2005. Now, if I were a senior-level executive that read about those problems in the newspaper, I would want answers and action. It seems GM executives demanded neither. The Valukas report does make several suggestions on changing the corporate climate at GM to respond faster and better to safety issues, and that includes improving communications with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, and I look forward to hearing from Ms. Barr about the changes the company has already made and its plans for future improvements in the future. GM paid the maximum penalty for failing to inform NHTSA about the ignition switch defect. That was $35 million. To me, it sounds like a lot of money, but that's not enough of a deterrent for a company with over $150 billion in revenue. Sounds to me more like a slap on the wrist. I'm an original co-sponsor of Ranking Member Henry Waxman's Motor Vehicle Safety Act, H.R. 4364, which would increase the maximum penalties for failing to inform NHTSA and the public of potentially deadly auto defects. As the ranking member of the Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade Subcommittee, I'm working on legislation that would do the same while also addressing several other issues raised by the GM ignition switch defect, including requiring the public disclosure of technical service bulletins. Those are the bulletins which provide information to dealerships about how to repair vehicles that are experiencing a widespread problem, but kept from the public. In GM's case, TCBs were issued for the faulty ignition switch in 2005, almost 10 years before a recall was issued. Those TSBs instructed dealerships to replace the defective part. I hope today's hearing will allow us to consider additional actions that might be needed in improving auto recalls, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. I yield back.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce the witnesses on the panel for today's hearing. Ms. Mary Barra is the Chief Executive Officer for General Motors Company and has been in this role since January 15, 2014, when she also became a member of its Board of Directors. She has been with the company over 30 years and has held a number of positions in the company, including Vice President of Global Manufacturing Engineering from 2008 to 2009 and Executive Director of Vehicle Manufacturing Engineering from 2005 to 2008. Mr. Anton Valoukas is a litigator and the chairman of Jenner & Block. He is a former U.S. attorney and fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers. He was hired by the General Motors Corporation to conduct the internal investigation into the faulty ignition switch, and he is the author of the report on the findings that was released 2 weeks ago. I'll now swear in the witnesses. You are both aware that the committee is holding an investigative hearing, and when doing so has the practice of taking testimony under oath. Do you have any objections to testifying under oath? Both witnesses say they do not. The chair then advises you that under the rules of the House and the rules of the committee, you are entitled to be advised by counsel. Do either of you desire to be advised by counsel during your testimony today? Both decline. Thank you. In that case, if you would please rise, raise your right hand. I will swear you in. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Both witnesses answered in the affirmative. You are now under oath and subject to the penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. You may now each give a 5-minute summary of your written statement. Mrs. Barr, would you like to open? Thank you. Please put the microphone close to you. Thank you. You have to turn it on as well. I think there's a... Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chance to appear before you again today on the ignition switch issue. Before I proceed with my brief remarks, I want to again express my sympathies to the families that lost loved ones and those who suffered physical injury. I'm ever mindful that we have a special responsibility to them and to those families, and the best way to fulfill that responsibility is to fix the problem by putting in place the needed changes to prevent this from ever happening again. When I was here 11 weeks ago, I told you how we intended to proceed with this matter. I promised we would conduct a comprehensive and transparent investigation into the causes of the ignition switch problem. I promised we would share the findings of Mr. Valoukas' report with Congress, our regulators, NHTSA, and the courts. I promised we would hold people accountable and make substantial and rapid changes in our approach to recalls. Finally, I promised we would engage Ken Feinberg to develop a just and timely program for compensating families who lost loved ones and those who suffered serious physical injury. We have done all of these things and more, and I welcome the opportunity to discuss them with you further. The Valoukas report, as you know, is extremely thorough, brutally tough, and deeply troubling. It paints a picture of an organization that failed to handle a complex safety issue in a responsible way. I was deeply saddened and disturbed as I read the report. For those of us who have dedicated our lives to this company, it is enormously painful to have our shortcomings laid out so vividly. There's no way to minimize the seriousness of what Mr. Valukas and his investigators uncovered. On June 2nd, Mr. Valukas presented the findings of his investigation to the Board of Directors of General Motors. I will leave it to Mr. Valukas to comment on his report. But for my part, I want you to know my reaction to the report and some of the actions I have taken since reviewing it. First, we have made a number of personnel decisions. 15 individuals identified in the report are no longer with the company. We have restructured our safety decision-making process to raise it to the highest levels of the company, addressing a key point in the Valukas report that critical information was kept from senior management. Under the new system, this should never happen again. We are currently conducting what I believe is the most exhaustive, comprehensive safety review in the history of our company. We are leaving no stone unturned and devoting whatever resources it takes to identify potential safety issues in all of our current vehicles and on vehicles no longer in production. Our responsibility is to set a new norm and a new industry standard on safety and quality. I have told our employees it's not enough to simply fix this problem. We need to create a new standard, and we will create a new norm. We've announced the creation of and have implemented a new global product integrity organization that is already enhancing the overall safety and quality of our products. And we are taking a very aggressive approach on recalls, and we are bringing greater rigor and discipline to our analysis and decision-making process regarding these recalls and other potential safety-related matters. It's difficult to announce so many recalls, but it's absolutely the right thing to do. As we discussed last time, we've engaged Kenneth Feinberg to review options for establishing a compensation program, and the process is moving rapidly. Mr. Feinberg has the full authority to establish eligibility criteria for victims and to determine the compensation levels. He has indicated he will share his final criteria with us by the end of this month, and we expect to begin processing claims by August 1st. We've created a new position of Vice President of Global Vehicle Safety and appointed Jeff Boyer, who's a highly respected expert in the field, to this position. I have personally told Jeff that he will have whatever resources he needs to do the job, and he has many already. In fact, we've also named a senior attorney to support him and to facilitate rapid information sharing across the organization. In addition, we've added 35 safety investigators that are already allowing us to identify and address safety issues much more quickly. And finally, we've instituted a Speak Up for Safety program, encouraging employees to report potential safety issues quickly, and we are recognizing them when they do so. This is more than a campaign or a program. It's the start of changing the way we think and act at General Motors. 2 weeks ago, I addressed the entire global workforce about the report. I told our team as bluntly as I knew how that the series of questionable actions and inactions uncovered in the investigation were inexcusable. I also told them that while I want to solve the problems as quickly as possible, I never want anyone associated with GM to forget what happened. I want this terrible experience permanently etched in our collective memories. This is not another business challenge. This is a tragic problem that should never have happened and must never happen again. The report makes a series of recommendations in 8 major areas. I have committed the company to act on all of the recommendations, and many of which we had started before and are already implemented. Finally, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I know some of you are wondering about my commitment to solve deep underlying cultural problems that were uncovered in the report. The answer is simple. I will not rest until these problems are resolved. As I told our employees, I'm not afraid of the truth, and I'm not going to accept business as usual at GM. It's time, in fact, it's past time, to insist on total accountability and to make sure vital information is shared across all functions of the company, so we can unleash the full power of our 200,000 employees, our 21,000 dealers, and our 23,000 suppliers. We are a good company, but we can and must be much, much better. This is my focus, and this is my promise to you, our employees, our customers, our shareholders, and the American people. Thank you again for having me here today. I'm pleased to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Mr. Valukas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Have I got it?
You have to bring that very close to your mouth and lift it up, and
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
even
Right.
closer if you would, sir.
Even closer?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Up. Now I got it? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In March of this year, General Motors asked me to determine why it took so long to recall the Cobalt and other vehicles that contained this faulty and defective switch, which has resulted in such disaster for General Motors and for the families who were involved in this matter. My explicit mandate from the General Motors Board of Directors was to promote and provide an unvarnished report as to how and why this occurred, to pursue the facts wherever they took us, and to report those facts in a report. General Motors Board also directed me to make recommendations based on those factual findings to help them ensure that this did not happen again. Jenner & Block, my firm, was given unfettered access to General Motors witnesses and documents. In point of fact, we interviewed in the 70 days or so 230 witnesses, some of them multiple times, so we had about approximately 350 interviews, some of them lasting 6 to 8 hours. We reviewed over 41 million documents coming from the files of everybody from the top executives down to the individuals who were involved at the most technical level. That number of documents involved tens of millions of materials that were personally reviewed by individual reviewers. And all of this was in an effort to find out the facts as to why this Cobalt recall took over a decade and why that defective switch remained unaccounted for during that period of time. I provided a copy of the report, the copy of that report was provided to the committee. I'm not going to go through the details, but the story of the Cobalt is a story of individual and organizational failures that have led to devastating consequences. Throughout the decade, it took General Motors to recall the Cobalt. There was, as has already been described here this morning by one of the members, a lack of accountability, a lack of urgency, and extraordinarily a failure of the company personnel charged with safety issues to understand how this car was manufactured and the interplay between the switch and other aspects of the automobile. In our report, we review these failures and identify cultural issues that may have contributed to this problem. As General Motors Board requested, we have provided recommendations to help ensure that this problem does not take place in the future. But as we note in my written statement to you, that is an issue with which GM must deal. The report does not give all of the answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Valukas, your report references such terms as the GM nod and the GM salute, where people nod in agreement and do nothing or look to others to do something, but no one accepts responsibility. Ms. Barr, do you agree with Mr. Valukas when he states that the culture is the problem in GM, that a culture where GM personnel fail to recognize significant issues to decision makers delayed the ignition switch recalls?
I agree that there's specific people involved that did not act appropriately.
You've been with the company for 30 years, right?
I have.
How does someone who has spent an entire career within the culture GM change a culture GM? I believe there's 210,000 employees or so with GM. You mentioned 15 were fired. That's 99.999%, if my math is right, of the people are the same. If you haven't changed the people, how do you change the culture?
Well, again, the 15 people that are no longer with the company are the people that either didn't take action they should or didn't work urgently enough to rectify this matter, and they are no longer part of this company. That was a strong signal to send within the company. But again, what's much more important is that we create the right environment where every engineer everyone in the company is able to come to work every day and do their best work, be supported. And that is the culture that we're working to create. That's the programs we put in place, like Speak Up for Safety, and the structural changes we've made.
The previously referenced article by Bloomberg notes that Cortland Kelly, who worked on the Cavalier, the predecessor to the Cobalt, raised questions about a defective fuel line. He had to continue to do that, even threatening and moving forward with whistleblower actions. This was referenced on page 93, Mr. Valukas, of your report, where it says, quote, Oakley also noted, however, that he was reluctant to push hard on safety issues because of his perception that his predecessor had been pushed out of the job for doing just that. I guess this speaks to the question as, what is a cover-up? Now, Mr. Valukas, you concluded there was no conspiracy and no cover-up. Does an employee acting alone who hides or doesn't share information a cover-up?
I'm sorry, in the latter part of the last part.
Does an employee who acts alone or who hides or doesn't share information a cover-up?
If the individual knows that the information is for instance, a safety information and understands that and deliberately decides to conceal that, that's a cover-up. Yes, it is.
And a corporate culture of carelessness where life-saving information sits in file boxes collecting dust, as you referred to, is that a cover-up?
What we found in connection with this, Mr. Chairman, was the following. We found that a large number of individuals had information that they did, in the first instance, they didn't believe was safety-related information, clearly up to about 2009. They looked at this as a convenience matter, and they dealt with it that way. We did not find evidence that any individual had a piece of evidence in connection with this cobalt recall which they considered to be safety information which they deliberately withheld from somebody else.
You put in your report, though, that Mr. Oakley specifically says he's reluctant to push hard on safety issues.
I'm sorry.
You put in your report where Mr. Oakley specifically says on page 93 he was reluctant to push hard on safety issues because of his perception that his predecessors had pushed out of a job. That implies he withheld safety information. First of all, Ms. Burr, is he still working for you?
Yes, he is. And actually, he's raised issues, and we are actively investigating. It's part of our Speak Up for Safety program.
What sounds like he decided not to speak up.
Well, he is now, and we're taking it very seriously.
I just find it hard to believe that of 210,000 employees, not a single one in that company had the integrity to say, I think we're making a mistake here. Not a single one. That's puzzling to me. I mean, even out of the VA hospital, we have lots of whistleblowers. I don't see here in GM that there's whistleblowers. Not a single person you interviewed in this? Let me jump to another question. I want to get back to this. Because there was also a lot of issues about lawsuits. You referenced some of those. But what I don't see here is questions. If you examine if GM responded appropriately to victims' discovery requests in the lawsuits, including what GM understood about the airbag deployment. Did you find that, I don't know if you spoke with plaintiffs' attorneys in this case, but did you find that in every case that information requested of GM was responded to in a timely manner of the plaintiffs' attorneys' requests, and that the information they presented to GM was responded to?
Mr. Chairman, what we did was, at the very beginning of this investigation, I sent letters and emails to the key plaintiffs' lawyers who were involved and where there would be in the most sensitive of these cases. I don't want to mention family names, but including the case that resulted in the disclosure of the two switches, inviting them to contact me so that we could talk in the investigation, determine deal with that issue. Not one of those attorneys responded to me. I also interviewed the attorneys who were outside counsel in connection with the GM matters, the particular piece of litigation, determine whether I had any evidence there of something which would indicate that GM had particular facts which they were withholding in order to accomplish something, and I did not find evidence of that in my discussions with outside counsel. I reviewed all of the emails relating to the legal department in connection with all of these cases. I say I, Jenner and Block, did. I didn't view them personally, to determine whether there was any evidence that there was information that they had, that they were now making a decision, for instance, to settle a case because they wanted to conceal the safety defect and prevent a recall. And I did not find information such as that. So
I appreciate it. I'm out of time, but I want to say there's a difference between not getting a response and not having the facts. And my assumption is when you tasked Mr. Valukas with getting all the information, if you don't have this information, do you still want it? The information with regard to if information was not passed on to plaintiff's attorneys who had made requests, do you still want that information? That's what I'm out of time. I'll go to Mr. Gett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Valukas, the chairman just asked Ms. Barra about this GM nod and GM salute that you talked about in your report on page 255 and 256, where you said one witness described the GM phenomenon of avoiding responsibility as the GM salute, a crossing of the arms and pointing outward towards other, indicating the responsibility belongs to someone else, not me. And then you said, similarly, Mary Barra described a phenomenon known as the GM nod. The GM nod, Barra described, is when everyone nods in agreement a proposed plan of action, but then leaves the room with no intention to follow through, and the nod is an empty gesture. When the chairman just asked Ms. Barra about this, she said, quote, there were specific people involved that did not act appropriately. Do you think this company culture, the GM nod and the GM salute, was just limited to those 15 people who have been terminated from GM? Yes or no?
I can't answer that question.
Do you think it was only 15 people who did this GM nod and salute?
No, I think there were a number of people who were on the committees, who were on the committee.
Thank you.
Okay.
And you learned that although the problems with the ignition switches safety issues were known by many in the company, GM senior leadership, including Ms. Barra, was unaware of these issues for years. Is that correct?
That is factually correct.
Thank you. These leaders included GM CEOs, including Rick Wagner, Mike Milliken, who was then GM's general counsel, and Ms. Barra, correct?
That is correct.
And Ms. Barra, you previously testified that you didn't know about the problems with the ignition switch until December 2013. Is that correct?
I testified I knew there was an issue with the cobalt in December that they were studying. I knew there was an ignition switch issue on January 31st. That's what I testified.
In December 2013, right?
January 31st, 2014 was when I knew there was an ignition switch issue.
Okay. Now, Gay Kent, who was the director of vehicle safety in your department, she made decisions in 2004 about the stalling being a safety risk. Did she ever share those findings with you, yes or no?
No.
And Jim Federico, a senior GM executive brought in to find solutions to the airbag situation in 2012, he knew about the problems, and he reported directly to you. Did he ever share his knowledge with you? Yes or no?
Well, he reported directly to me at a portion of his time, and then he no longer reported.
But did he ever tell you about these problems? No, he didn't. Now, you've made a number of structural changes at GM, and I appreciate this, and I know you're committed to doing it, but the company culture is what concerns me as well as the chairman. And the problems that I've identified today are not problems about who reports to whom, but rather a culture that encourages people not to stick their necks out and report things. And in fact, just yesterday, I learned from a source very close to GM who has intimate knowledge of the culture there, that the results of Mr. Valukas' investigation and the terminations of these 15 employees have only created more paranoia within the company that people are going to lose their jobs. And so I want to ask you, Ms. Barra, what are you doing, not just to change the structure and put these safety programs together and so on, but to change the culture of the company so that the company rewards people reporting problems, not sweeping it under the rug?
We are doing a lot, and it's, to your point, it's not done by words, it's not done by slogans, it's done by action.
Well, so what is it that you're doing?
So we have put the Speak Up for Safety program, and I'm getting personally information from employees. I am acting on it. We have a regular program. We're going to be recognizing those individuals. I have spoken to all our employees globally, encouraging them. But I think most important, the work that we're doing and the actions we're taking with the additional recalls demonstrate how sincere we are to put the customer in the center of everything we do, and we want to make sure we are doing the right thing as it relates to safety, as it relates for quality, and our employees are seeing that.
Okay, I would like to see if you may supplement your answer with the specifics of how you're rewarding this.
Happy to do that.
I would appreciate that. Now, I want to talk to you briefly about this compensation fund. I'm pleased now that you're telling us that Mr. Feinberg is setting up a compensation fund, but we still don't have very many details of it. Has the company or Mr. Feinberg determined the criteria about who will be eligible for payment, yes or no?
He is developing that, but I think the important
So we don't have that criteria yet, correct?
He's got a draft protocol that he's getting input. He is an independent
Would you please provide that to this committee, the draft protocol?
We can.
Thank you very much.
Can I have a point?
No, let me ask you this. Will Mr. Feinberg have discretion to make eligible payment victims beyond those identified by GM to date? Because we're hearing there may be up to 100 deaths from this.
We want to capture every single person who suffered serious physical injury or lost a loved one, every single person as a result of the...
So your answer is yes?
Yes.
Okay. And will those people who receive payment through this program be required to release their legal claims?
I'm sorry, the voluntary program?
No, if they get compensated from Mr. Feinberg's program, will they have to release their legal claims to go to court? Do you know?
This program is in lieu of taking this to court.
So your answer is yes?
I can't say exhaustively, but as it relates to the specific...
Okay, will you submit your answer, please, and let me know that? Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time expired. Now recognize Mr. Upton for 5 minutes.
Thank you again. You know, I'm a firm believer that you cannot solve a problem that you don't acknowledge or fully understand. So while I'm going to try to be very interested in forward-looking solutions, I want to begin by walking through and defining some key problems that we identified from this report. First, a simple yes or no. Is it true that GM engineers did not believe the ignition switch moving from run to accessory and causing a stall constituted a safety problem? First, Ms. Barrow. And then
Initially, yes.
And Mr. Valukas?
Yes.
Can you confirm that a GM engineer test driving the Cobalt in 05 experienced a shut-off after hitting the key with his knee, and that his report on the incident was categorized as an annoyance rather than a safety issue?
Yes, that was captured.
So let's continue talking about how GM employee warnings and experiences were handled. I read with a lot of concern this morning's news coverage alleging that employee safety concerns went unheeded. I won't ask you to respond to a particular newspaper article, but I do want to get your reaction to a case uncovered in our investigation about a specific employee concern. I want to know how it was handled at the time and how it would be handled if it was raised today. You've got a tab on page 83 in your binder, but in 05, a GM employee drove an 06 Chevy Impala home from work. When she hit a bump in the road, the ignition switch fell out of the run position and stalled the car. Let me read you from her email, which is up on the screen, sent in October of 05 after she took the vehicle for repair. Quote, I think this is a serious safety problem, especially if the switch is on multiple programs. I'm thinking big recall. I was driving 45 miles per hour when I hit the pothole and the car shut off, and I had a car driving behind me, swerving around me. I don't like to imagine a customer driving with their kids in the back seat on I-75 and hitting a pothole in rush hour traffic. I think you should seriously consider changing this part to a switch with a stronger detent. End quote. So to reiterate, nearly 9 years ago, a GM employee suggested the stalling of the 06 Impala was a serious safety problem and speculated that a big recall was coming. So when was the recall for the 06 Impala announced? You know?
Impala, I believe that was part of Monday.
2 days ago, Monday. 9 years ago. So, looking at that case and looking at as if it happened today, can you tell us specifically how a concern like this would be handled if it was raised today?
Yes. As I testified when I was here last time, we consider a stall to be a safety issue. And so when a stall is brought forward, if we then learn and understand it's because of a defect in the way the vehicle, some part or a system in the vehicle is working, we are going to address it. We do have to understand stalls also happen when you run out of gas or pop the clutch. But if we are aware of a stall and we then learn that it's because some part of the vehicle or a system is not operating properly, we'll immediately take action, and that's what is represented in what we did on Monday.
Mr. Valukas, in going through the report, there were some comments made as to the consumer friendliness of the TREAD Act requirements in terms of complaints that were received. What suggestions might you have relating to that in terms of how do we proceed in the future?
I don't have a specific legislative suggestion for you. I did include in the recommendation, something which I think is very important for General Motors, which is they need to look at NHTSA as a partner in this issue and not somebody to be held at bay, so that the transmission of information is a free flow of information and problems are elevated at the earliest possible point. It is clear to me from the earlier aspects of this investigation that there were times where it was almost an adversarial relationship rather than a passing information, but I don't have a legislative suggestion for you.
Ms. Barrow, do you have a comment as it relates to the compiling of the information for the TREAD Act, for the complaints?
I think it's very important that we have a productive relationship with the agency, with NHTSA, and I do think there's things that can be done for the national VIN database and also improving the search capability and ability to use information, valuable information that's in the TREAD database.
Okay, I yield back.
I have a clarifying question based on what something Ms. DeGette and Mr. Upton said. Given that I think GM has now recalled something like 40 million cars, do you have a revised number on the number of deaths that may be in crashes that may have been associated with a faulty ignition switch? Do you have a number yet?
The recall that we did on Monday, we know of no fatalities.
But overall, related to what Ms. DeGette was saying, is there a...
With the information that we have as it relates to the Cobalt and the population of those vehicles, the known number we have is still 13.
Thank you. Recognize Mr. Dingell now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to Ms. Barra and to Mr. Falukas. We appreciate you being here today. You, Mr. Falukas, and your team have compiled a report about serious internal shortcomings at General Motors that has contributed to the company's failure to report a safety defect in the Chevrolet Cobalt. I know that Mrs. Barra shares my grave concern about the report finding, and I look to her and the GM leadership for establishing more responsible and communicated cultures at GM. We all recognize your report is not an end to the investigation. It does include a number of common sense recommendations which I feel GM should commit to implementing in full. My questions to Mrs. Barra today will require simple yes or no answers. Now, to Mrs. Barra. We have learned that Cobalt's ignition switch was redesigned, but it was not given a new part number. This obfuscated the company's internal investigation and contributed to a delay in defect reporting and subsequent recalls. Mr. Falukas suggests in his report that GM adopt procedures that include a specific protocol for reviewing authorizations of out-of-specification parts, tracking out-of-specification parts, identifying who should be notified of them, and identifying and elevating any particular safety issues that might be associated with the use of out-of-specification part. The report goes on to suggest that high-level review should be required before approval of use of out-of-specification part. Now, does GM commit to implementing these particular suggestions in full? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, Mrs. Barra. Subsequently, Mr. Falukas suggests in his report that GM make improvements in its problem resolution tracking system, PRTS. More specifically, his report suggests that the standard for closing PRTS without action is clearly defined and sufficiently rigorous. He goes on to suggest that PRTS should not be closed without action, absent clear sign-off by named individuals and appropriate levels of review. Furthermore, his report suggests that GM reaffirm that the lack of an acceptable business case is not an acceptable reason for closing out a PRTS if that involves a safety issue. Does GM commit to implementing all of these suggestions? moving forward? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, again, Mrs. Barra, likewise, I think we all agree with Mr. Valukas that GM should implement more robust policies and training with respect to component and vehicle safety matters. At the most basic level, does GM commit to training its employees about the lessons learned from the Cobalt investigation? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now again, Mrs. Barra, will GM train employees to recognize and elevate safety issues, including the emphasis on the need to identify and address safety issues actively, regardless of whether the vehicles are in the design or production phase? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, again, Mrs. Barra, when fostering a culture of safety, I think we all recognize it is very important that employees who recognize and report safety problems in components and vehicles feel comfortable in so doing. As such, does GM commit to promote visibility and enforce rigorously the non-retaliation policy contained in paragraph 19 of the May 16 NHTSA consent order? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Barrett, it's also imperative that all automakers communicate clearly and promptly with NHTSA. I said all automakers. Will GM create a centralized database for all communications with NHTSA and train its employees who communicate with NHTSA to file their communications in this database? Yes or no? Now, do you think that that is good for other companies?
Yes, I do.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy.
Thank you very much. Now recognize the Vice Chair of the full committee, Ms. Blackburn, for 5 minutes.
Ms. Barrett, thank you for coming back. I've got a few questions for you, and I have to tell you, many of my questions that I asked and couldn't get answers for in April when you were with us. You said after Mr. Valukas finished the report, you hope to be able to answer these questions. Now, since that time, I have been able to be on the floor at the Spring Hill facility, which is there in my district. We've got 1,868 employees that certainly do not want the GM brand to be tarnished by all of this. And so it's important to me, on behalf of all those constituents, that we get some answers and that we do this very quickly. So we thank you for coming back to us today. I want to go back to something I asked you about in April. And you explained that a part that doesn't meet all specifications can still be acceptable for safety, and the example that you used was with steel. Now, we know that the Cobalt ignition switch was redesigned in '06, right? And testing documents from that time show that the torque of the redesigned switch was still below specifications. And yet, after this change, the reported incidence of non-deployment in these vehicles dropped dramatically. Well, when we look at that and we read those documents, and the chairman mentioned, we've been through 1 million pages of documents and 15,000 pages of documents from NHTSA. So we're not sitting idly on this. We're taking some action. So I want you to go back through this and elaborate on your perspective that something could still not meet specifications and be acceptable for safety. And I'd like to hear from you when it is okay to deviate from specifications and people in the process not be aware of this.
Well, I think when you look, as you start developing something, you have a design specification. But what's most important, and the testing that we're doing now is, and had done in the past, but are doing in a much more broad fashion now, relates to the actual performance of the part and how the part operates in a subsystem, how it operates in a broader system, and then how it operates in the vehicle. And so as we design now, we're validating at the part level with the new organization we put together called the Product Integrity Organization. They're actually now looking and doing much more validation as it relates to subsystems. Because what you really want to know is as all the parts come together, that it's going to operate as a system and perform safely.
Okay.
And that's what the new organization is accomplishing.
Okay, so what you're saying then, if it doesn't affect safety or effectiveness, it's okay not to meet specifications.
I'm saying there's times where, as long as it has to meet the performance requirements.
Okay, then how should an engineer evaluate the performance, the part's performance against the technical specifications?
Again, you look at performance against requirements. What are the requirements of how that part needs to behave in the system? And that's how an engineer evaluates it. And again, what we're doing now is taking that much more broadly, so we're not relying on one person to understand across the whole vehicle.
Then in this product integrity system, how does GM track the deviations that are occurring from the technical specifications?
That's all captured in very specific
How
documents.
transparent is it? Is it transparent to the engineer?
It's available to the engineers, to the chief engineers in the organization.
Okay, was this done when the switch was approved in '02 and redesigned in '06?
No, what I'm talking about is what we've done this year.
Okay, so this was not done. So we still have, there was a glitch in the system and people approved a part that was not okay.
Well, the problem with the specific change you're referring to was that change was made and it was not documented.
Okay, then how does a GM engineer know when there is a deviation from a specification, if it is too much or too little, or if it is acceptable, or if it is going to pose a safety problem?
Again, there's a couple aspects of this that you have to look at, but if you go back to when those changes were made and it wasn't documented, the records were not there to document there was a change, and that was something that's unacceptable, and the individual who didn't document that is no longer with the company. I'm telling you that as you do good engineering, you are going to make sure you understand the requirements of what you're designing, make sure the part, the subsystem, the system meets those requirements, and have full documentation.
Okay. All right, I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Braley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barra, welcome back. Mr. Valukas, welcome to the committee. Ms. Barra, I want to start with some of the comments you made in your opening remarks. I have a couple of questions I want to talk to you about. You mentioned specifically that you had promised that you would conduct a comprehensive and transparent investigation. Do you believe that that was accomplished?
I think the Valukas report was comprehensive. It was very far-reaching, and we have shared that information.
And you also said that you promised you would share the findings of the report with Congress, our regulators, NHTSA, and the courts. This is a copy of the report that we received, and it states on the very front page of the report, privileged and confidential, protected by attorney-client privilege and as attorney work product. You indicated that you hired Mr. Valukas to do this independent investigation, but it's obvious from the report that you considered this to be an attorney-client relationship, and the report itself has sections blacked out so that we on this panel don't know who some of the victims were that are identified in the report. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
You also indicated that you would engage Mr. Feinberg to develop a just and timely program for compensating the families who lost loved ones and those who had suffered a serious physical injury, including the families who are represented here today. There was a recent news report from the Detroit News which indicated that Mr. Feinberg has confirmed that the compensation fund will not in any way address people who weren't killed, people who weren't seriously injured, whose value of the automobiles they purchased has been diminished because of all the controversy over these parts that we've been talking about. Were you aware of that?
The compensation program that Mr. Feinberg will independently administer is for those who lost loved ones or those who suffered serious physical injury. The issue of the vehicle or the value of the vehicle is in front of the courts.
And that will not be addressed by Mr. Feinberg's
That is
fund.
correct.
Now, one of the things that we know is that this year alone, GM has issued an astonishing 44 recalls covering 17.7 million vehicles in the U.S. and more than 20 million worldwide. How many of those recalls, to your knowledge, relate to problems that were known to someone in GM before the bankruptcy sale order of July 2009?
At the senior level of the company, or the action would have been taken.
So it's your testimony that none of those are covered.
I'm not sure what you...
You're saying here today that none of the recalls that have been initiated this year relate to problems known to someone at GM before the bankruptcy sale order in July of 2009.
What I said was the senior leadership had no knowledge of those issues.
And that's not my question. You did a very exhaustive investigation into the cultural problems at GM.
Yes, we did.
My question is, as part of that investigation, did you identify anyone working at GM who had knowledge relating to those product recalls that covered products affected by that bankruptcy discharge order in July of 2009?
Again, if there was a known safety issue, there would have been a recall done.
Did you attempt to determine that?
I was not involved in that process, so I can't comment.
Isn't it possible that that discharge order contributed to GM's lax approach to safety defects on cars built by the old GM?
Absolutely not.
Well, we've talked a lot about this culture of irresponsibility at GM. You've testified about it. It's covered in Mr. Valoukas' report. How can you say absolutely not when you haven't even focused on that issue?
There were many, evidence of that is there were many recalls that were conducted during that period of time. But I would say now we've redoubled our efforts and we've gone back even more exhaustively than looking at data from TRED, data from customer feedback. And we are now even, with the Product Integrity Organization, it's already accomplishing its task of going and looking at how the vehicle performs to a higher level to ensure we have the safest vehicles.
Mr. Valoukas, you focused on this culture at GM in your report. You weren't here the first time when I showed Ms. Barra this screwdriver that was handed out by General Motors in the 70s and 80s as a promotional item, and it says safety comes first at GM on this screwdriver. As part of your investigation, the history and culture of GM, did you look back at to whether the old GM had made safety a priority the same way that Ms. Barra says the new GM is committed to it here today? And aren't there institutional problems that are much more far-reaching than simply firing 15 employees?
Congressman, that's a good question. We looked back and solicited from everybody that we interviewed information about whether something in the culture caused them to do something differently than they otherwise would have done, or whether safety became a secondary issue. Almost uniformly, people would say to us, safety was the top priority. But we identified in this report all of the instances of which we were aware relating to this matter where people took a different position, so it's there. And I would not ascribe to everybody the conduct of the people involved here, but I do say that culture had something to do with the reason why this recall took so long.
My time is up. Thank you for your testimony.
You now recognize Mr. Barton of Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barra, we're glad to have you back, and Mr. Valoukas, we're glad to have you before us. Our opportunity or responsibility on the committee is to provide for the general welfare, and in doing that, get the facts on the table so that people can have faith that the products that your company produces are safe. And of course, your requirement is to make sure that you do produce a safe product that hopefully results in a profit for the company and the stockholder. But we're both on the same side. We both want products that are safe and let the public be aware of the capabilities, but also the shortfalls. I'm going to ask most of my questions to Mr. Valoukas simply because we didn't have your report last time, but I will have 1 or 2 questions for Ms. Barrow at the end of my time. I want to focus on the fact that the part number was not changed back in April of 2006. A GM engineer did approve changes to the ignition switch, but did not change the part number. And Mr. Valukas, in your report, you observed that the decision to not change the part number was not properly vetted or scrutinized. You note that a Mr. DeGiorgio did not recall why he did not change the part number. Is that correct? Is that what your report says?
Mr. DeGiorgio told us that he did not change the part number, and that as he looked back at it, that he reflected that he should have changed the part number.
Okay. And apparently, and obviously that's very important, because you have a part number change, then that creates a paper trail. There was some sort of a problem that had to be corrected, and if you're doing an investigation, you can compare and from that time forward see if the problem was fixed. Now, I want to direct your attention to that big binder that we've got right between you and Ms. Barrow, and on tab 35.
35?
Yes, sir. 35.
Give me a moment.
There is an April 5th chain of emails between this Mr. DeGiorgio and engineers at the switch supplier Delphi and some other GM employees. Attached to that exchange is a spreadsheet of upcoming changes to the Delta ignition switch. Can you locate that?
I think I have it, yes.
Okay. Now, it's interesting to me that these emails, the subject is not anything that's safety related. The subject matter is Delta ignition switch changes, tooling tweaks, increased process capability. And then it goes in the email, it talks about this is a black box design, and they want to change the part to increase the process capability. This will improve the fallout rate at the Delphi Condura plant. Well, first of all, what is a fallout rate?
I presume it's the rate in which something fails.
Okay. So if you improve the fallout rate, that means you're going to decrease the number of failures. Is it important in your mind that since they talk about a black box, apparently anything within the black box, they don't have to be too worried about it as long as everything in the black box works as specified? Because there apparently, in retrospect, is quite a bit of commentary about, well, we didn't really pay much attention because it was all within the black box.
Well, that's the commentary, but when there is, you know, the general rules, if it changed fit, form, or function, whether it's in the black box or otherwise, the part number ought to change. And in this situation, in particular to this aspect of it, which is increasing the torque, that would fall within one of those three categories. And I think you can find an explanation, black box, but even Mr. DeGiorgio in his interview with us conceded that this was a change in fit, form, and function and would have required a change in the part number. And the consequences were devastating over the years. This was not the only time. That issue came up 4 times, as you properly note, where people came back to him and said, did something change? And he said no. And that's one of the reasons why this took a decade.
Well, do you think that this particular email exchange, they knew they had a safety problem and they're couching their phraseology differently to hide it? Because they don't really talk about a torque issue or anything. They're talking about a fallout rate and within the black box. Do you think this was intentional, or
no?
You don't?
I don't have. Let me put it this way: we have not been given access to the Delphi witnesses. We've not been permitted to interview them, and our receipt of documents has been limited from them. On the GM side of the process, the answer to that question is no.
Okay. And Ms. Barrow, I'm going to, in the time that I don't have anymore, my question to you, Ms. Blackburn tried to elucidate an answer from you about a change in culture and the fact that even when they were making these specification changes, that they didn't meet the specification wasn't that a problem, and shouldn't you make sure that everything meets your specifications? And your answer was, well, if the overall system works, it's okay. Now, to me, that doesn't represent a cultural change. And I've talked to the General Motors engineers and management team in my district down at Arlington, and they are vocally insistent that they're not going to use any part in their plant that doesn't meet the specification and operate just as it's supposed to.
I totally agree with you. A part needs to operate just as it's supposed to, and there's been significant change. First of all, everything that's done, it's documented. It's gone through a validation process. It's also gone through a systems integration. So it's much more rigorous in knowing that the part is good and that the system is going to act or the vehicle is going to perform safely and with quality. And as it relates to, making a part change, absolutely acceptable. I ran an assembly plant, and I totally agree with the people that you've talked to at the Arlington plant. If you do not have a documented part number, you shouldn't be changing parts. So their answer is absolutely correct, and I appreciate the fact that they're committed to do that.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Gentleman's time to start. I recognize Mr. Butterfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's an unspeakable tragedy that so many families have suffered as a result of these shortcomings of General Motors, and some of these families are with us today. And as feeble as it may be, I simply want to offer my condolences to the families who have been affected. Let me start with you, Ms. Barra. Is it Barra or Barra?
It's Barra.
Barra. Okay, we've had a little debate about that back here. But Ms. Barra, Mr. Boyer, who is on the public record, is stating that the company has hired 40 new defect investigators. How many of these individuals will be new to the company?
I can't speak specifically, but I can tell you that I believe most of them came from within the company, but they came, and I know how the selection process was, and they were some of our very best engineers across the company, so they knew together, collectively, they knew a broad array of parts and systems in the vehicle.
Well, our information in interacting with your company suggests that all 40 of these new individuals would be promoted from within the company. Do you dispute that?
As I said, I knew the lion's share. I can't tell you if one or two came from outside. I know we did an exhaustive search inside to get some of the best and most experienced engineers into this role.
Well, I think you've heard the theme throughout this committee today on both sides of the aisle that we're talking about a new culture within the company. And I would strongly suggest that you look at bringing in some outside fresh blood to run that part of the company. How many vehicles has General Motors recalled since the Cobalt recall began in February? I've heard 40 million, but I know that's over a period of years. But how many actually have been recalled since February of this year?
I have to add up the count. I don't know if we have that information.
Hundreds of thousands.
It's several millions, in the tens of millions.
And let me ask you this. How are vehicle owners informed by GM about these recalls? Do you email them? Do you mail them? How do you do it?
First of all, we follow what the regulations are, the NHTSA process, so we send a letter, but we've gone above and beyond that. We've sent additional letters in addition to the ones that are required as part of the NHTSA process. We've also gone out on social media. We've also hired more than 100 people to work on our customer engagement centers to call and reach out to these individuals. We also know dealers who have been great partners in this have, in many cases, gone out and contacted or received calls and explained the situation.
So you go beyond just sending a letter to the address of record.
Absolutely.
That's reassuring. When you communicate with vehicle owners, are they informed of the seriousness of these safety hazards posed by the ignition switch?
Yes, in fact, very specifically in the letter, it states that to operate the vehicle safely that you need to have the key or just the key in the ring and take everything off your key ring. We've also, to these individuals, as you know, made, if they're still uncomfortable, although we have demonstrated and NHTSA has reviewed and said it is safe to operate the vehicles this way, again, with the key or the ring. If the individual still is uncomfortable because we're customer focused, we're putting these individuals into loaner or rental vehicles.
And what percentage of the people who are notified actually bring the cars back into the dealer?
Well, in general, we're in the 80s, and I've been told we're one of the highest of how we complete recalls. But in this case, we're still working through it.
And once there, how long does it take to get it fixed?
Oh, it's a matter of an hour or so.
Just a couple of hours, it can get done. It seems like there's a large volume of recalls, according to your testimony, and I'm more concerned about how safely and timely can these corrections be made. I mean,
Well, we have...
with the large volume that
Yep.
you're talking about. You're talking about millions of cars.
Right, but if you look at, in some cases, it's replacing a part. In some cases, it's as simple as making sure a connection was made. In other cases, for instance, in some of our crossover vehicles, over time, a crimp of an electrical connection wore out. It's simply going back and recrimping and soldering that. We have been exhaustive, and I know it sounds like a large number of vehicles. It is, but we want to do the right thing for our customers. To my knowledge, this is the most expansive, comprehensive review we've done, because in some cases we're acting on vehicles where there's no tread data even to support there's an issue. But as we went in and looked at the subsystem performance, we wanted to make sure we were acting.
One dealer can do dozens in a single day.
I'm sorry?
One dealer, one large dealer, could do dozens in a single day.
Actually, we have dealers that are extending their hours in their service department to be responsive to customers to get these repairs made.
Finally, is GM currently investigating ignition systems of any other product lines which have not been recalled to date?
We will continue. As I said, we plan to be substantially complete by the end of this month with the additional people we've put in, but we are going to continue until we're confident that if there's any issues on our vehicles, whether it's a different safety system or ignition switching, that we've reviewed it.
Thank you. Mr. Valukas, we live by the clock up there. I'm sorry. We'll get you next time.
Now recognize Dr. Burgess for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Barrow, if we could just continue on that line of questioning that Mr. Butterfield was pursuing, how are your dealers, how are they holding up under what must be a massive onslaught of people needing their cars fixed?
Our dealers are doing a tremendous job of supporting the customer. As I said, we have many dealers who are reaching out. We've had dealers who, had a customer that was several miles away. For instance, there was one who they were concerned because their daughter had the vehicle and there wasn't a dealership close by. The dealer went back and forth and got the vehicle, got the repair made, and gave a loaner. So I can't be more proud of how our dealers are supporting the customer.
But yet, you've got millions of cars that need to get in and be attended to. Pretty hard to provide a loaner car for that population.
Again, the loaner, well, first of all, most dealers for a simple repair have loaner programs. It depends on the dealer and the issue. But on specifically the Cobalt and that population of vehicles, we are providing loaners or rentals, and we've worked with rental companies to make sure they have enough vehicles to do that. But again, in many of these cases, even though the vehicle's recalled, it's a very simple visual inspection to know if the vehicle's okay or not, and the dealers are very equipped to do that with their service technicians.
And I just recall being on this committee when we went through this with Toyota back in 2009. The Toyota dealership in the district that I represent had extended hours, would stay open till late at night to accommodate people who otherwise were working and couldn't get in. And you feel that that is the case currently with the GM dealers?
I absolutely do. I've spoken to hundreds of dealers, and I know our North America our President, Alan Beatty, has also. We have regular communications as they share with.
Let me interrupt you just because my time's going to run out. How are you doing? What seems to be the choke point in this? Is it getting the part to the dealer?
Actually, we've produced and shipped over 400,000 parts. The challenge is getting the customer to come in and get the vehicle repaired, and that's why we've employed a lot of innovative ways to do that, and that's why the dealers are reaching out.
And yet, in a story in the New York Times either yesterday or today, people talk about receiving multiple postcards. You got to come in and get your car fixed, and they say, I tried, but they don't have the part available for me. Are we going to start hearing less and less of those stories?
I think we should, because we start another line within a week, so we're continuing to ramp up. But right now we do have the parts, but we've tried to be incredibly fair in that in a first-come, first-served basis as customers raise their issues. Some of the postcards that we've sent are because they're required on a frequency by law, and we're complying with the law.
Thank you. Mr. Valukas, let me ask you a couple of questions. I think I understood from your introduction that you are a trial attorney. Is that correct?
I am.
I mean, I got to tell you, at some point, were you just pulling your hair out over some of these things that, as your investigation churned through this information? Let me specifically, you've got the binder in front of you. I don't have mine's not divided up into tabs, but page 119, 119
Of the report?
in your report.
Thank you.
Here's a paragraph. Witnesses have inconsistent recollection as to whether the Product Investigations Group became involved in the Cobalt airbag non-deployment issues at this stage. Everest reports that in April 7, the FPA group transitioned the Cobalt airbag matter to the PI group, where it was taken on by an engineer named Eric Budrus. Documents in Budrus's file indicate he was working on the issue, and a May 4, 2007 investigation status review presentation planning worksheet states that he was scheduled to present on an issue described as Cobalt airbag discussion item. Budrus had no recollection of the involvement. I mean, they were right up to the point where they had an answer, and now this guy doesn't even remember working on it. Was that pretty frustrating from a trial lawyer's perspective?
One of the key problems we found is the fact of lack of documentation, which led to lack of accountability. And I think a classic example of that was what happened in 2005 when we went back to find out why did they close the investigation into the Cobalt issue. And we found ourselves in a position where there were no notes with regard to the matter. Everybody at the meeting pointed to somebody else in the meeting as having responsibility for having closed the matter, but we could not ascertain who actually had that responsibility or what were the circumstances which caused the closure to take place.
Correct.
And that lack of accountability is reflected in so many of these areas. When we went back, we were dealing in many instances.
Let me just ask you,
no
because I'm going to run out of time. 15 individuals have been terminated by General Motors, is that correct? But we can't know those 15, as we read through this report, we can't know the names of those 15 individuals because of employee privacy concerns, is that correct?
It's been submitted to the committee.
Been submitted to the committee?
But we've asked that it be confidential to respect the
All right,
privacy.
thank you for that. Can you just tell us what was the basis for termination? Because I go through this, it looks like a lot more than 15 people should have been terminated.
And there was a senior group of my leaders that we looked. We read the report, and we were very thorough in looking at those who we believe didn't take the actions they should, and then those who simply didn't move with a sense of urgency. The people closest to us over a repeated period of time are those who are no longer with the company.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Now I recognize Mr. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for doing the follow-up hearing. Ms. Barra, you said that you had shipped 400,000 parts. Was that for the ignition issue?
Yeah, I was specifically
How many do you estimate was recalled, or with the need? How many was recalled? Because I keep hearing 16 million, but I know there are other
issues. Of the specific ignition switch cylinder, because it's a kit now that we put together, the total number of vehicles produced globally was over 2.6 million. Now, we know not all of those are still in service today, and we have built kits to service the 2.6 population. We're already over 400,000. We'll be complete by October 4th.
Okay. You've been vocal about GM's effort to change its corporate culture, which you describe in our last hearing in April as a cost culture. Mr. Bukas, can you describe some of the problems you saw with the corporate culture in your report? Talked about the GM nod and the GM salute. What do these refer to?
Well, let me be specific on that. The GM, without using those phrases, you had a situation where it took a plaintiff's lawyer to do the simple thing of comparing two switches, one from 2006 with one from 2009, to find out the GM had manufactured two separate switches. No one goes back to revisit previously made decisions. So they're stuck in, if it's a decision we've made, we don't go back and revisit and look to see if there's something else. We have a situation where you had silos. You had people within GM who had certain levels of information that was not shared with other individuals. And so when the other individuals found that information, for instance, the Indiana report, Officer Young's report, that information was ultimately supplied by third parties outside of GM. GM did not know that they had that information within their own files, at least some of that information on files, and some of it was in public records. You had circumstances where, among other things, you have a sensitivity to the use of the word stalls. which might have created for someone the impression that maybe we stay away from using words which will force people to ask hard questions rather than taking an approach in which you ask the hard questions and take whatever those answers are. So we found instances of that which had a significant impact on, at least in terms of the finding information, impact on how this investigation, how the investigation of the Cobalt Switch.
Well, it sounds like the OGM's culture was mostly, let's don't talk about a problem. Is that what it is, without notes? And I understand we're both lawyers. You may say, well, I don't want to take notes because somebody can subpoena them. So GM just put them under the rug, and now it's coming home to roost. Let me, Ms. Barra, at our last hearing, you referred to the new GM in your responses to your questions. The culture would change under your leadership. You testified that GM created a new vice president of global vehicle safety who was filled by Jeff Boyer. And I know you've been with GM a number of years, and Mr. Boyer has been with GM.
Yes, he's been.
And so y'all both worked for the OGM. Can you tell me what is going to be different in the new GM, even though everybody in the 40 inspectors that Congressman Butterfield talked about are GM? You need a culture change and not just verbiage.
I completely agree with you. So it'll be the actions we take, the actions we're taking. But I can also tell you that the men and women of General Motors, the vast majority, come to work every day and they want to do a good job. They heard me talk about this report. They are as deeply troubled as I am, and they are taking action, and we are creating a culture. I have evidence of it every day where employees are coming forward. They want to do the right thing. They want to produce high-quality, safe vehicles.
And I only have a minute, and I agree, but that needs to continue because, you know, I also know how it works on the shop floor, that, oh, don't talk about that, just do your job. And that's what's got GM into this position. Your company set up a compensation fund for victims of this fault, and recognizing that no amount of money can replace a loved one or can compensate for someone who's terribly injured. How would that fund be administered, and what numeric total do you expect to compensate the victims with? Have you announced a total for that?
We haven't announced the total. Again, it's being run by Ken Feinberg, who's known as an expert in this area. He will have complete
I'm familiar with Mr. Feinberg from the
He will have complete independence, but I think it's important to note that General Motors wants to reach with this compensation program everyone who lost a loved one due to this issue or suffered serious physical injury, and that's what we've communicated to Mr. Feinberg.
Well, I'm out of time, but you know, there are a whole lot of GM customers out there who are frustrated because over the decades been loyal, but now we're seeing with 16 million recalls, there's a problem, and I hope you have it fixed. But, Mr. Chairman, I would hope we would continue this to make sure it is fixed. And I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back, and I recognize Dr. Gingrey for 5 minutes.
Ms. Barra, I want to ask you a question about the situation in the Cobalt. If one of my two twin 16-year-old granddaughters driving in the Cobalt, and inadvertently the ignition turns to the accessory position, if they, who just got the driver's license 3 months ago, I would think that their initial reaction would be to try to turn the car back on, start the car back again, although it's in drive and it's not in neutral. Would the car start back up?
Well, first of all, if they were driving the vehicle and they had just the key in the ring, this condition shouldn't happen.
No, but if it did happen. Let's assume that it did happen.
Right. Okay, so then you've got to put the car, you've got to restart the car. I guess.
I think the answer is you would have to put it in neutral.
Put it in neutral
before it would start.
Right.
And that would be pretty hard for a 16-year-old inexperienced driver to even think of with an 18-wheeler bearing down on them. And you know, I just as I listen and the other hearing that you were at several weeks ago, General Motors has got to have the best engineers in the world, whether they're electrical engineers or mechanical engineers, probably both. How in the world would they not know that when the ignition inadvertently, because of the low torque, and it shifts to the accessory position, the engine stalls, that would also deactivate the airbags? I would think that kind of testing is done to a fare-thee-well before a vehicle is approved for sale. I mean, how could they not know that?
I can't speculate on why they didn't know. What I can tell you is any time a vehicle stalls now, we consider it to be a safety issue, and if we find that there's a malfunction in a part or a defect in a part that causes the stall to occur, we're going to...
Well, I would say a safety issue indeed if the side airbag would not inflate if somebody got T-boned in the middle of an intersection when this happened in a young person. Even an experienced driver of 40 years is not going to think that quickly. Mr. Valukas, and I think you alluded to this a few minutes ago, if not for the Brooke Melton lawsuit, and Brooks, I can't see the back of the room, but her picture may be up there on the wall. She's in my district in Paulding County, Georgia, the 11th Congressional District of Georgia. If not for the Brooke Melton lawsuit, and she was killed, and the fact that her lawyers figured out that the ignition switch part from model year 2008 was different from model years 2005, 6, and 7 in the Cobalt, would we even know about this ignition switch problem today? Would we even be aware of it?
The answer is yes, because there was an open and, at that point, significant investigation going on at that particular point. And certainly there was information and evidence that was accumulating as they were going forward, pointing to the fact that they had these non-deployments, pointing to the fact they had fatalities, and pointing to the fact that the switch had something to do with it.
Well, that smacks of a big cover-up to me. And after General Motors learned of this change, it took months for GM, outside experts, to confirm that there had been a change. Why did this take so long?
I don't have a good answer for that. I can tell you it did take that long. I can tell you that from the time of April of 2013, when that deposition took place, they knew or should have known at that, or they knew at that point that they had two different switches, and they gave it to Mr. Malati, the expert, and he came back with his confirmation of what they were given in the way of information in April, and that took until almost October.
Yeah, it's amazing. When the issue was presented to decision makers in December, no recall was announced. It took another month and a half before GM finally decided to recall the Cobalt. What information was missing in December that prevented GM from issuing a recall at that time? Ms. Barrett, can you tell me?
I can't talk about the specific information. I think we do know that not all the information was presented at that meeting. I would say when the right information was in front of that group, they did make the right decision, but I would also say, and I've said publicly...
Well, let me just say in my concluding 35 seconds, this whole sequence, from the time the company learned of a potential difference in the parts during the Melton litigation to the time the recalls were announced took 10 months. Ms. Barra, why the foot dragging? Is this typical of GM's investigations into a product concern? And how do you intend to change this?
Well, we already have with the way we're working through recalls today. We've changed that process. It's expedited, and the most senior levels of the company are involved in it. And I think, again, although I don't want to do recalls, we're going to do what's right for our customers, and we're demonstrating it today.
Thank you, and I yield back.
I should ask clarifying questions. The doctor referred to it. A number of members have asked with regard to the word cover-up. Could you define what cover-up means, Mr. Valukas?
In this instance, what we looked for was any evidence that individuals knew that they had a safety issue and took steps to conceal the fact that they had a safety issue. That's what we were looking for in terms of cover-up. And when we interviewed individuals, we asked them questions to gather the facts to see whether, in fact, that had taken place, and we sought to test those facts against the documents that we were reviewing. So if someone knew something on a given day, we identified that, and then we took steps to see whether they concealed what they knew from other individuals. We did not find that. That's what I'm talking about.
Does your definition also include if people slow-walked moving on safety issues? Is that also cover-up?
If it was a, pardon me, I don't mean to interrupt.
That's okay.
If it was deliberately done, then it would encompass something like that. If it was a matter of someone being in a position, for instance, when one of the investigators was given the assignment, he was given no deadline, he was given no sense of urgency, so he put it into the queue with other investigation, and it took its time. That I would not call a cover-up. I would call that something other than that.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Yarmouth, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barr, welcome back to the committee. When you were here on April 1st, I told you that a member of my staff had had a Chevrolet Malibu that was subject to a recall. She found that out by going on the website, not through any personal notification. And she inquired of the dealership how she should proceed, and they said there was no fix. And I presented you with that dilemma, and you said at the time there is a fix, whether it is a check or a replacement of the product, but that a fix does exist for that specific vehicle. Well, I have here the important safety recall that she just received on Monday, so that's 2.5 months after you appeared here on April 1st, notifying her of the recall, saying that her vehicle may experience a sudden loss of power steering assist, and then other language, which could result in an increased risk of a crash. And also informed her that the part doesn't exist yet to fix the product. So when you consider that situation, a different vehicle, different problem, with the ignition problem that we've focused on, and you've already said that many of these vehicles will not be fixed, the ignition problem, till October. Those parts won't be available. What are consumers supposed to do when they're going a period of up to 6 months or longer without any way to fix their vehicle? Can they assess the risk? I mean, I don't know what my staffer should do. There's no really, I see all the pharmaceutical products, the long list of possible side effects, and you have to calculate the risk. But would you advise, or would you let your son or daughter drive these vehicles now with the level of risk that you may know more about than we do?
Well, on the Cobalt specifically, we've done extensive testing on using or driving the vehicle with the key or the key in the ring, and it has validated that it's safe. We've also reviewed that with the technical experts at NHTSA, and they have concurred. So in that case, those vehicles are demonstrated safe to drive. Just in general, if people have concerns, they can go to their dealer or they can call our Customer Engagement Center, and we walk them through the specifics of their specific issue. Because again, in many of the recalls that we've done, it's not a part replace, it's a visual check, and depending on what happens, it would be what needs to be repaired. So each individual recall has a slightly different look and feel to it.
So I know you've talked about the possibility of loaner vehicles and rental cars and so forth, but and I understand the difficulty with a supplier gearing up to produce a part that they may not have made in 4 or 5 years, and they have to all of a sudden come up with several million of them. We have a part manufacturer in Kentucky in my district that services Peterbilt trucks, and I've been to theirs, and I know how much work they have to do. But again, is there any alternative to, a reliable alternative to these consumers who, again, face a very important decision as to whether, I don't know what the risk of whether NHTSA has assessed the risk of with regard to power steering assist, whether that's significant or not. But there are a lot of consumers out there, I'm sure, are wondering whether they should be driving or not.
Again, I would encourage them to call our Customer Engagement Center or talk to the dealer, and we can talk about the specific situation.
Okay. I have no other questions.
The gentleman...
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I yield to the ranking member.
I just wanted to ask you a question, Ms. Barr, since there's a little time here. So you had testified that out of the roughly 2.6 million of these cars that were recalled, you guys have sent 400,000 parts out to your dealers. Is that right?
Produced and shipped.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yeah, roughly. And as of Monday, it looks like about only 177,000 of these vehicles have been repaired. And you had testified a little bit earlier, so that's 177,000 vehicles out of 2.6 million vehicles. And we've talked about this before. This is one of our big concerns in this committee is how do we get those folks to take in those recalled vehicles to be repaired? And you said you're looking at some innovative ways to do that. I'm wondering if you could just take a few seconds to talk about how GM's trying to get those people to take those cars in.
Well, we're doing a lot on social media, and we're looking at, the populations, especially, some of these vehicles are older vehicles. So we've done actual research to figure out what messages would be most compelling to have these individuals come in to get their vehicles fixed. I would also say we're, the dealers are working to do specific arrangements with each individual to make it as inconvenient or
As convenient, I
as convenient as possible to reduce the inconvenience. And so there's a number of steps. Right now we're in a,
Okay, let me ask you, because can you meet the October 4th NHTSA deadline?
we are on track. I have talked to the CEOs of the companies making these parts, and we monitor it on a daily basis.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. Hey, Mr. Olson, 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair and welcome Ms. Bada and Mr. Valukas. I approach issues like these from the perspective as a naval officer and a pilot. Leaders in the Navy are called skippers. Good skippers give credit for others who do good. When good things happen in the squadron, they give credit to others. Bad skippers take all, good skippers give the credit and take all the blame. By that definition, Ms. Barra, you're a decent skipper. But people have died because of GM's defective product. As we knew, and Mr. Vlachos' report shows clearly, those deaths occurred because our ship, GM, has some problems that can't be fixed overnight. As GM skipper, the burden to fix these problems is upon you, ma'am, squarely upon you. I think you know that. GM has to rebuild its trust with the American people. And part of that trust is being straightforward on the number of deaths that have occurred because of these defective cobalts. You've testified that 13 deaths occurred because of these cars. Is that right, ma'am?
I've testified that with the information we have, we believe that the ignition switch may have been related to 13, but I don't have all the information.
Okay, because that's a problem, because on the wall behind you, there are 15 photographs of tragedy and loss from cobalt vehicles.
And that's why we're doing the compensation program. It will be independently administered by Mr. Feinberg, and I can assure you that I and General Motors want to make sure that anybody who was harmed as a result of the ignition switch defect is a part of that program.
I'll get that compensation fund later. How about injuries? Any number of injuries you think have been caused by the defective cobalt? Injuries, not deaths, but injuries? What's the number? An idea, ballpark?
Again, I don't have the specific number in front of me, but we don't have a complete number because we only have the information that's available to us. But again, that's why Mr. Feinberg, who is an expert in doing this, and we want to have everybody who had suffered serious physical injury or suffered the loss of a loved one, we want everyone to be a part of this program.
And thank you very much, Mr. Feinberg, because as you know, restoring the trust of the American people, part of that is having a viable, robust compensation program for the victims' families. And I know you've tapped Mr. Feinberg, as you mentioned, to evaluate options for the Compensation Trust Fund. My question is, from your opening statements, it sounds like GM has not put any limits on Mr. Feinberg. Is that true? No limits on the compensation? He's got all options out there to determine the Compensation Trust Fund?
I didn't hear the beginning of your question. I'm sorry.
The question is, you've tapped Mr. Feinberg to have this compensation fund. Are there any limits upon him? Is he just out there because doing whatever he wants to do? I mean,
he is independent, and he will determine those who qualify that meet his protocol and the appropriate amounts.
Will your board have oversight, have to approve his recommendations, or just no? So he's an independent operator.
He is independent.
Have families that previously reached settlements with GM, will they be eligible for this trust fund?
They are eligible to apply.
How about the families whose claims were before GM's bankruptcy? They're
eligible to apply.
Eligible as well. How much do you expect the fund to be? Any ballpark?
Without knowing the protocol, I can't speculate on that. By the time Mr. Feinberg shares with us his protocol, then we will have to take an appropriate estimate, but we really won't know until the program has been fully administered, and we have indicated that we will share the number of incidents and also the total.
Is there a chance the fund will be capped? A limit?
No.
No chance. Okay, I yield back. Thank you, sir.
General Yield.
I will.
Let me just ask you, Ms. Barrow, along the lines of, do people know how to get in touch with you if they're having trouble getting their car fixed?
Again, in the letters that we sent, and we send to the record, we go to Polk and get registration data, and that's the best information we have. That's why one of the things that would be very helpful is to have a national VIN database. That would be incredibly helpful to make sure we're reaching them directly. But in the communications that we've had, there's information on how to contact us as well as their dealer.
So the message should be a person should contact their dealer?
Well, they can contact our customer engagement center. There's also a number at the back, a 1-800 number at the back of their owner's manual. But then in addition, we know many people will contact their dealer.
Before this testimony concludes today, could you provide us with that 800 number?
Sure.
A lot of people are watching this hearing, and I mean, I'm getting a lot of activity on Twitter, people wanting to know how to get their cars fixed.
Sure.
So you'd help us if you did that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now recognize Ms. Castor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Lucas report refers to the board's commitment to improving the quality of GM's vehicles through a bonus plan for corporate officers and employees at the executive, director, and supervisor levels. Part of the calculation for whether a bonus would be payable was improvement in the quality of GM's vehicles. Mr. Valukas, do you know what improvement in quality means or how it is quantified for the purposes of the bonus calculation?
I can't give you the calculation. I can tell you that within the quality calculation is supposed to be safety, that the individuals which we interviewed identify improvement in quality as relating to the safety issue, so that it would include
So
both.
safety is supposed to be a quality
Absolutely.
component, but how is that quantified?
I don't have an answer for you on that.
Okay. Ms. Barra, did you receive bonuses through this bonus program during the last decade while the ignition switch issues were ongoing with GM?
There were many years where there was no bonus paid, but there are some years where there was. Not all of those years there was quality, but I can tell you that the quality components, one aspect of it is external surveys in which safety is an element of that.
How many years did you receive those bonuses?
I'd have to go back and check.
Okay, so you'll provide those to the committee?
Sure.
Thank you. And Ms. Barr, will GM's bonus program be revised to include an explicit safety component?
It already has quality, that already has safety as a piece of it. I will commit, though, I will go back and review to make sure it is explicit.
Because Mr. Valukas just said he reviewed it and he's not certain how expansive that is and what really goes into considerations of safety.
I will make sure it's explicit. It's a good suggestion.
Okay. Ms. Barr, will GM's compensation structure for all employees, including those below the leadership levels, now include a safety component?
Again, when you speak of all employees, 220,000 employees or over 200,000 around the world, and we comply with the different laws in those compensation programs. But we have sent a strong signal that quality is important, and in fact represents 25% across all levels.
I would recommend that as part of your overhaul for all employees to encourage considerations of safety that is made much more explicit to all of those employees. In the past, GM has put into place incentives for high-level employees to make improvements. If GM is serious about its new focus on safety, there should be stronger incentives in place for executives and all of the other GM employees, at the very least, to identify safety problems and improve the safety of all GM's vehicles. And now I'd like to ask you about the adequacy of the recall. GM has assured the public that the replacement part for the recalled vehicles will fix the defect. Low torque that causes the ignition switch to turn too easily from the run position to the off or accessory position. Ms. Barr, I hope you can assure me that this is the case.
It's been validated extensively, and then NHTSA has as well reviewed it.
But here's my concern. There seem to be two problems with these vehicles' ignition switches. Issue number one is that the force required to turn the switch is too low. And issue number two is that a driver's knee can hit the key or key fob and inadvertently turn the switch to the off position because it is placed too low. The fix to the recall will be to install a new ignition switch with higher torque, requiring more force to turn off the switch. Is that correct?
Right, but if you look at the switch, the cylinder, and the key, and then you look at how that works as a system, it's been validated to not only talk about the issue that you're talking about about turning, but also the knee, potential knee interference. Both have been validated.
What will the torque specification that the new switches will meet? What's the new torque specification?
Well, I believe the specification is 20 plus or minus 5, but the more important thing to look at is the overall performance of the system, and that's what we've done.
Is that 20 Newton centimeters?
20 Newton centimeters, yes.
And do you know how GM arrived at that specification?
Well, that was a specification, but we've gone back and tested extensively with varying levels of keys on rings and with varying heights of people, size of people. It's been an exhaustive testing.
Well, here's their concern, because when the committee interviewed several GM engineers, Mr. DiGiorgio, Mr. Altman, and Mr. Stouffer, they all told us they had no idea of the basis for that specification. And GM has received multiple reports indicating that the placement of the ignition switch in these vehicles could cause a driver's knee to hit the key or the key fob and turn off the switch. Isn't that right?
Neither of those individuals have been a part of the company as we have done or been involved in all of the extensive testing and validation that we've done specifically with the new product integrity organization. So they're really not in a position to comment.
But certainly that would raise a concern if your former engineers continue to have concerns over the fix.
Well, I don't find Mr. DiGiorgio credible, and I personally reviewed the testing that's been done by very experienced, seasoned engineers, and I am confident that the right validation has been done of the system in the vehicle.
I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize Mr. Griffith for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barra, we've talked a little bit about the Compensation Trust Fund, and you have indicated that Mr. Feinberg is going to set parameters, but you don't have those yet. He's going to determine who's eligible, and he's going to make the determination as to how much they're eligible for. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you know if he's going to determine, is he looking just at, because most people have focused just on the airbag deployment, and your list of 13 that you know of at this point only includes airbag deployment issues. Do you know if he's looking at other parameters?
We have told him that we want to make sure anybody who suffered harm, either lost a loved one or suffered serious physical injury because of the defect with the ignition switch, that they should be a part of the program.
So you acknowledge what Mr. Gingrey was getting to earlier, and that is if you're traveling down the highway at a fairly good rate of speed, whether it be 48 miles or more or 35 miles an hour, and all of a sudden your car goes into a stall or the ignition turns off, you've got to put that into neutral and restart it. That is going to have been responsible for a number of the accidents that took place, whether or not the airbags were deployed, or in fact, even if the airbag not being deployed didn't cause the death or injury, there might still have been an injury as a result of that. You acknowledge that?
If the ignition switch was part of the issue, we want them in the program, and there are other incidences.
So then I have to question why you have one of the two folks in the accident that was referred to in Mr. Young's, Trooper Young's accident report. One of those two individuals is on the list of 13, but Natasha Weigel is not, and that raises the question because she was in the back seat. So the airbag didn't affect her, but clearly that accident may very well have been the result of the fact that you had a young driver, as pointed out by Mr. Gingrey, who suddenly finds themselves in an emergency situation on the highway going 48 miles an hour, and they don't have an engine that works anymore. And you would agree that if the engine's not working, if the power is off, you don't have power steering anymore either, do you?
We were clear about the 13, but again, we want to get everybody who was affected, and that's what we're focused on. And so, again...
And you want to make sure that everybody is fully and fairly compensated. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Then I have to ask you this question, Ms. Barra. Why are your lawyers still trying to seek protection in the bankruptcy court?
We are not going to revisit those decisions. I think what we're doing is going above and beyond with this compensation program to get to the people. This was a unique series of mistakes that was made over a long period of time, and we feel it's the right thing to do
So you feel it's the right thing for GM to continue to ask your bankruptcy lawyers to defend them and get the shield from the bankruptcy court in that court, and not have to deal with these cases that come up, and to only let the only solution be Mr. Feinberg if there's not already been a settlement. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Feinberg's,
yes or no?
Mr. Feinberg's program is a voluntary program. Otherwise, people have the same rights they have today.
They have the same rights, but you're trying to block those rights in the bankruptcy court, yes or no?
Our intent is to do a compensation program, is to do the right thing for these individuals.
But you're not instructing your lawyers to back off of their claims in the bankruptcy court, that you want to be shielded from in the bankruptcy court from any claims that these outside parties might bring. So if Mr. Feinberg's parameters don't fit, but a competent court might find that they should fit, not going to matter to you because you got the bankruptcy protection. I'll move on to another question. I'm concerned a little bit about the fact that your legal department didn't pick this up. And I want to know, were any of the lawyers fired for not being diligent?
I have stated that there were 4 different functions in which individuals were fired at all levels of the company, legal being one of them, engineering, quality, and public policy.
Okay. Because it did concern me that that Trooper Young's report was sitting in the GM files in the legal department for a period of about 6 years, and only one person opened the file during that time period, and that was a legal assistant. Let me ask you this. Can the lawyers, and I think they ought to be, but can the lawyers start a safety investigation?
Anyone in the company can raise a safety issue. We want them to, and thank you, they're more than able to do that.
And in this case, the lawyers didn't do that, and is that why one of them might have been fired, or some of them may have been terminated?
You know, clearly there were people that didn't share information to put all the pieces together in this, and it's unacceptable. And those individuals that were in the best position to share are no longer with the company. And we are strongly encouraging everybody in the company to raise issues. I will tell you specifically.
All right, I'm about to run out of time, so I appreciate that. But let me just state this in closing. If GM truly wants to compensate everybody who's been harmed fully and fairly, they ought to ask their lawyers to stop asking the bankruptcy court for bankruptcy court protection and let these matters work their way out. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Ms. Schakowsky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Valukas report identifies Mr. Ray DiGiorgio, who you said, Ms. Barry, has no credibility. The GM design release engineer, was his title, is being almost solely responsible for key decisions to approve the deadly ignition switch in 2002 and to modify it in 2006. Mr. Valukas, your report states that one of the key failures was, quote, the decision by a single engineer who did not advise others of his decision to accept an ignition switch with full knowledge that it fell well below GM's own specifications. Is that correct?
Correct.
The implication here is that Mr. DiGiorgio acted alone. But the report describes problems associated with the ignition switch, aside from low torque, many of which were known as early as 2001. According to the report, the, quote, entire electrical concept needed to be redesigned, end quote. The switch had significant problems that were known to GM. In his interview with the committee, and at this point I just want to congratulate the staff of our committee for the amazing work that they did independently to investigate all these issues. That in his interview with the committee, Mr. DiGiorgio told committee staff that he met with his superiors around February 2002 to inform them that the ignition switch would be delayed. Attendees at the meeting included the vehicle's chief engineer, the program engineering manager, and electrical directors. It was clear this switch was getting a lot of attention. So, Ms. Vara, is it your belief that one engineer, Mr. DiGiorgio, unilaterally approved a part that had been plagued by problems from the start?
The basic issue is that the switch that he approved to go into production did not meet the performance requirements. That was the first mistake.
And it was DiGiorgio's alone?
He was the one responsible for it.
Knowledge of the problem is important. Torque problems plagued the switch from the start, and the Valukas report says that in 2006, Mr. DiGiorgio, again, unilaterally approved changes to the switch to increase the torque. Mr. Valukas' report notes, quote, there is no evidence that DiGiorgio told others at GM, including engineers on the Cobalt program, about the spring change to the ignition switch that he authorized in April of 2006. So, Mr. Valukas, the report does note that other GM employees had received documents describing the ignition switch change as early as June 2006, and that these documents clearly indicated that the switches used in pre-2007 models were not within specifications. Is that correct?
The answer to that question is there were emails which were forwarded to other individuals which contained within those emails, after the change was made, information about the fact that the torque had changed. We interviewed those individuals. Those individuals were by and large in the warranty area. They were looking at something that it meant nothing to them, as the two that we were able to locate and find. They were totally unaware of the issues concerning the switch not deploying any aspect of it. So the one individual who did know all of the facts and had that information was Mr. DeGiorgio. The other engineers who were on this email chain, it meant nothing to them.
Okay. So, but there is an email, I'm holding it here, cited in your report, discusses implementation of the new...
Reference at page 102 and footnote.
I believe that's right. And the quote is, increase torque forces to be within specifications. And it was sent to 5 GM employees on June 2nd, 2006. But we have also obtained another document that was not included in your report. And this document indicates that another GM contract engineer may have approved the 2006 change. It's a production part approval process report obtained by Delphi through GM's Global Quality Tracking System. It is dated June 1st, 2006, and it lists GM Supplier Quality Engineer, a GM Supplier Quality Engineer. The document has a section labeled, quote, Supplier Quality Engineer Notes, and these notes read, this is a quote, new PCB and spring plunger implementation for performance improvement. Part approved per supplier, submitted warrant, and GM 3660. So, Mr. Valukas, have you seen that report, the Global Quality Tracking System?
Yes.
So did you interview the listed supply quality engineer or look into what role he might have played in approving the switch change in 2006?
We did the following. We looked at that form change, and what happened with that form change was the following. So the supply quality engineer's function is to determine whether the boxes are filled out and materials are properly identified here, and then he submits that and puts that into the system. He does not have, as we understand it, anything to do with making decisions on the change. He's actually functioning as somebody putting something into the system. Did we do anything? I don't think we interviewed that particular individual. We know what his function was and what the role was.
Well, I don't want to minimize Mr. DeGiorgio's role or excuse his actions in any way, but I do think these documents point to the fact that the problem at GM is deeper than just one rogue engineer. And I yield back.
Thank you, Shields. I can now recognize Mr. Johnson from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Valukas, your report discusses an early May 2005 email related to a customer concern about the ignition switch. That's at tab 12 of the folder that you have there. Your report focused on Mr. DeGiorgio's awareness of this exchange. There were others on this change, including Doug Parks. What was Doug Parks' position at the time?
I honestly don't recall his title at that time.
Wasn't he the vehicle chief engineer?
He may well have been. As I say, I don't recall.
Why was it more significant that let's assume that he was, because that's what we think he was. Why was it more significant that Mr. DeGiorgio was aware of this exchange rather than the vehicle chief engineer?
I don't know that it was more significant. It was significant because Mr. DeGiorgio ultimately made the decision to change the part. And in our interviews with him, he said that he was not aware of the fact that this was an issue, that he was not aware of the publicity, he was not aware of the email traffic concerning this, while we had information that that was not, in fact, the case.
What is the chief engineer's responsibility?
Within the company? I do not have an answer for that.
Okay.
But I can find out, and I'll be happy to submit that information.
Ms. Barra, do you know what the chief engineer's responsibility is?
Chief engineer is responsible for the overall integration of the vehicle and making the balance and trade-off decisions for that vehicle.
Okay.
And if issues are raised to him, then he or she will deal with that.
Okay. What knowledge should someone in the chief engineer position have about the vehicle compared to someone such as Mr. DeGiorgio? I mean, would it be reasonable that the vehicle chief engineer would have known about this situation?
Again, a vehicle, there's 30,000 parts on a car. The chief engineer has to count on the people doing their job. We've now put, in the mid-2000s, there was validation engineers that were added to make sure that the process was done well, and now with the product integrity organization, we'll be validating the subsystems. But the chief engineer, you know, the
takes information from those that come up. Okay.
The system works.
I got to move on. In a May 4th response to this chain, Mr. Parks requests a plug to insert in the key head, since it appears to be the only, in his quote, only real quick solution. But this solution was not implemented for months. Mr. Valukas, do you know why?
Part of the function of what was happening in the organization, they were treating this as a customer convenience issue rather than a safety issue. So they looked at issues in terms of price, expense, cost.
Rather than safety.
That was
it. A few weeks later, on May 17th, a new PRTS was initiated. At the time, the program team decided to pursue additional solutions beyond the service fix for the key insert, a short-term production fix for a new key that changed the slot to a hole, and a long-term solution to introduce a more robust ignition switch. Who was responsible for initiating and implementing these changes?
These would have been the committees which were involved in the, and I don't have the committee name in front of me, I'll look at the report, but the committees that were involved in the review, and ultimately they didn't do what they said they were going to do.
Were they reviewed by the vehicle chief engineer?
I don't know that.
You don't know. Do you know?
As I read the Valukas report, I think what you're referring to was a continuous improvement team.
Okay.
And I believe the chief was not there. It was the program engineering manager.
Why did it take until 2009 to implement the new key head? And who was responsible for ensuring that this change was implemented? Do either of you know?
I can tell you that the reason it was delayed was because it was treated again as a customer convenience issue. They had an issue with regard to their supplier and a dispute with regard to his ability to deliver. And it wasn't until 2009 that the dispute was resolved, and they ultimately made that change with regard to the key.
Okay. Ms. Barra, in my previous life, I worked in a publicly traded company as a part of the executive team. We had a risk and compliance department. We had a risk and compliance director. As my understanding of this issue, part of the concern that you have addressed and that you are continuing to address is that this information never bubbled up to some of the key decision makers. The SEC requires, there are laws that require reports of risk and compliance related issues. Were any of the SEC reports or were the risk and compliance folks notified that millions were being paid out for claims as a result of some of these problems? How does it break down that bad in a company that is, you know, publicly traded?
I can't speak to specifically what was, in an SEC report, but what I can tell you, it's unacceptable the way things broke down, and that's why we've made dramatic process changes. But as Congresswoman DeGette indicated as well, we have to make substantial changes in the culture, and we're well on our way to doing that. And I believe the men and women of General Motors want to make sure we have the safest and the highest quality vehicles on the road.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back now. Recognize Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our panel. As we examine what went wrong in this terrible tragedy, the most important job, I believe, for Congress is to strengthen and improve auto safety laws to ensure that something like this never happens again. We certainly owe it to the families of the victims of this tragedy, many of whom are in our audience today for the hearing. That being said, one area that I believe we need to address is to improve early warning report data. Mr. Valukas, can you describe briefly early warning report data?
What is the data itself?
Yes.
Information that comes to the attention of the company, which indicates that there are problems, potential safety problems, of which they are required to make alerts.
And I believe the 2000 TREAD Act requires that the information be reported to NHTSA?
That is correct.
So, Mr. Valoukas, you describe a number of cases where GM investigators analyzed this TREAD data to attempt to identify or explain airbag non-deployment in cobalts and ions. Is that not correct?
In the ions, yes. The answer is I cannot give you a number of where that was done.
And the federal regulators also conducted analyses of the early warning report data, but were not able to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and identify the defect?
The issue of the non-deployment of the airbag was a matter of discussion in 2007 between NHTSA and General Motors. It was NHTSA saying we note that there are these non-deployments. GM's response to that was to begin an investigation under Mr. Sprague to see, to keep a chart of what was taking place. There were no major further discussions about that issue until 2013.
It seems that part of the problem here is that early warning report data provided to NHTSA are reported in 23 broad categories. In the case of this defect, the early warning data provided to NHTSA spans several categories, including engine, airbags, and category of other. NHTSA is able to request more detailed information from auto manufacturers for individual warranty claims and field reports, but it is difficult to know what to request given the minimal level of detail provided in the first place. NHTSA needs more detailed early warning data so that they can spot trends and request the most useful follow-up information from the auto manufacturers. And more early warning data should be available to the public. We can all appreciate the value of outside experts in spotting issues that otherwise go undetected. Finally, NHTSA needs appropriate enforcement mechanisms to ensure auto manufacturers comply with the laws, especially when safety is at stake. On May 16th, GM agreed to pay the maximum fine for failure to report a safety-related defect to NHTSA, and that, I believe, is $35 million. Ms. Barra, what was GM's net income in 2013?
3 point. Yeah, as I say, it's about just under $4 billion.
Just under $4 billion. So the penalty for failing to report the ignition switch defect is less than 1% of GM's earnings for last year.
That is a correct math, but I think, our intent is that we deal with safety issues. By the time you get to talking about a fine, the customer's already been impacted in an incredibly negative way. We want to make sure we're putting high-quality, safe vehicles on the road, and we want to work, in cooperation with NHTSA to do that.
Nonetheless, it is not much of a deterrent, Mr. Chair. We need to increase this maximum penalty. $35 million is not an adequate deterrent to a large, profitable company like GM. If the penalty for inaction had been higher, GM might not have waited over a decade to report this safety defect to NHTSA. And it's clear to me that NHTSA needs higher penalty authorities. We need to make certain that the penalty for not reporting a safety defect is a sufficient threat to deter auto companies from needlessly delaying safety decisions. Fixes in these areas, like the TSB's public improving early warning report data and increasing penalties, should be easy for us to agree upon. And with the seconds I have remaining, the GM Recall website indicates that even after the new switch is installed, customers should, quote, only utilize the key, key ring, and key fob, if equipped, that came with the vehicle. Ms. Barra, many consumers have key chains with multiple keys. Why, if the new replacement switch is adequate, does GM still recommend that consumers not use their full key rings the way they would normally use them?
Again, the system meets and has been validated, and that's been validated also by NHTSA. But as I have gone through this process over the last 3 months, I have seen incredible things on keychains that across the industry, I think this is actually an industry issue that we have to look at. I notice keychains everywhere I go now, and I just think it's something that needs to be addressed more broadly across the industry.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize Mr. Long for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. Mr. Valukas, do you feel like that you conducted a thorough investigation?
Yes.
According to what you testified to today, if my math is right, how many people were on that team? How many people investigated along with you?
The number of individuals who were employed at one point or another in reviewing documents, doing interviews, several hundred.
Several hundred. According to my math, you all looked at 1,220 documents a minute.
I'm sorry, say that again, Councilman.
I said, according to my math, you all looked at 1,220 documents a minute. If you said you had access to 41 million documents over a 70-day period, that I don't know how in the world you could do a thorough investigation in that time frame.
Congressman, we use computers and programs to analyze the documents for purposes of kicking out those documents which are reflective of the issues that are here. We use as part of that database requests are being made by Congress, requests were being made of us by the United States Attorney's Office, by NHTSA, and we isolated those documents and then gave them through 3 levels of review for purposes of determining whether they were relevant to any aspect here. I feel very comfortable. I can't tell.
So back to my first question. You do think it was a thorough investigation? I'm not in your business, and you are, so I'm just trying to learn here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the report that you released, were you given a deadline by General Motors on when that needed to be out?
I think with General Motors, the board of directors, when they employed me to do this investigation, asked me whether I could get it done within a certain time frame, and I told them we could. That was the deadline. It was my commitment that we could do it in that time period. Part of that was associated with the fact that they wanted to know, because there were deaths involved here, what caused it, what were the problems. Part of it was because of that we wanted to get the report out or to be able to respond to Congress, so we had that deadline.
And once you got your report completed, or once you completed the report, to whom at General Motors did you present the results?
Board of directors.
Okay. And what was their reaction?
The reaction, I can't tell you what the reaction was. I know the reaction was that is what you've seen with Ms. Barra here, that to follow up on it.
Okay, and so you didn't receive any resistance to your findings or your recommendations from the board?
None. None.
And were you asked to make any changes to your report?
No, I was not, and what I did tell them and what I've mentioned to staff here, that if we found something different as we pursued, we'd continue to gather documents because there are requests here and elsewhere, we would review the report, and if there was anything in the report that we found to be an error or needed to be corrected or changed anything, we would report that back to the board, and I presume they would report it back to you.
So other than that, your report, does that end your investigation? And I've been here for about 90% of the hearing, but I did have to step out for a few minutes ago. So.
No, we believe we have completed the inquiry, but as I say, we would update it if we found something which changed in any significant way. I believe back last week we found something in the report that we corrected, and we notified your staff of that immediately.
Okay, thank you, and I yield back.
Ms. Elmers, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Ms. Barra and Mr. Valukas for being here today for this very, very serious subcommittee hearing. And I, too, as some of my colleagues have said, extend my condolences to the family. It must be very difficult for you to be here and listening to this dissection of information, as important as it is. These are your loved ones. Mr. Valukas, I do want to, this is more of a process question that I have for you, sir. Going back again over the investigation and what you have reported, back March 2007, it says staff from NHTSA approached GM personnel in between meetings in Washington and mentioned a concern about non-deployments of cobalts and ions. What is your understanding of the information that was shared by NHTSA?
My understanding, it comes from the interviews. I did not talk to anybody from NHTSA. We did not think that we were going to be interviewing federal officials. We interviewed the people at GM and looked at the documents and materials which they produced as a result of that meeting. Mm-hmm. And it was that in the course of that meeting, NHTSA noted that there had been these non-deployment cases and asked General Motors about them. The response to that was the assignment of I believe it was Mr. Sprague at that point, to look into it and try to document what was taking place, to keep a chart essentially as to, are these happening, how many are there, et cetera.
Okay, and the gentleman that you're referring to, what division was he in as far as, I'm assuming General Motors or NHTSA? What division was he part of?
He was an investigator, I believe, with FPA, an FPA investigator, which means he would have been detailed into the legal department.
Okay. So, according to our information, when the engineers returned to Michigan, apparently after being here in D.C., the product investigations team, the group that determines the root cause of the problem, reviewed the claims relating to the cobalt non-deployment, but ultimately decided not to pursue it. Why did the product investigations not pursue this matter at the time?
That's a very good question. And the answer is this was some of those things that was passed off to another agency. Sprague was keeping track of it. Mr. Sprague was keeping track of it. The other investigators weren't following up with regard to it. They were gathering information, if you will. But that's where they went with it.
So when you say that it was kind of handed over somewhere else, you're referring to the product and the field performance assessment division?
Yes.
Okay, because according, again, to our information, it says after the product investigators declined to investigate, the responsibility for tracking these claims, I mean, there again, I think that's something significant as well, was assigned to the Field Performance Assessment Division. Now, do you consider this to be unusual, like an unusual pattern to have followed? I mean, would this be typical in a situation where there's been an obvious issue that's come to light and it just kind of be passed off to another? And I guess I would like to know, too, one, it was given to another division, but what exactly is the Field Performance Assessment Division responsible for? And, you know, was this just a way to kind of, you know, put aside the problem because they weren't focusing on it?
Well, I don't know if it's typical. I do know it happened in this case, and it was one of the things we called out in the report of passing off responsibility from one committee to another committee. FPA would be focused on potential claims in the legal department and whether or not they have litigation or things like that which indicate the existence of these problems. But they are not the products investigators. They're a different group. But then here's what you have is you had it passed off to Mr. Sprague, who then gathered information about it for years, and nothing else was taking place other than gathering that information until 2009. So everything was in hiatus.
Do you know who it was that actually made or authorized that change? Who gave the assignment to Mr. Sprague?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know if we have a name. I can get a name for you.
Okay, if you could, that would be incredibly important information for us as a committee to have. Thank you.
I know the legal department was at the meeting with NHTSA, so it was as if the legal department said, well, we'll take a look at this, and then they went forward. But I'll get you a name.
Did the FPA ever attempt to evaluate the matter back in the product investigation? Was there ever an attempt, according to your investigation, did anybody address these issues?
Yes. In 2009, when they had the Second Continental report, then it became elevated, if you will. They looked at it. They realized that it was something that could be associated with a switch as being the cause of the non-deployment. And at that point, you know, other things started to take place, including Mr. Sprague going to visit Mr. DeGiorgio and asking him whether there had been a change in the switch, and him saying no.
Okay, so I guess my last and final question here was basically, you know, was there a reluctance there? But I believe you just indicated that there was, and a reluctance to actually acknowledge and address the issue.
Well, I can't. I'm sorry.
That would be I'm sorry. That would probably be hypothesizing on yourself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time, and thank you.
Time's expired. Now it's committee's practice that if another member of the full committee can ask questions after other members have asked theirs. And so we now recognize Mr. Terry, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee of Commerce and Manufacturing, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to recognize the parents and family members in the back. Those photographs up there really keep reminding us why we're here and investigating today. Mr. Valukas, I want to ask you, because I want to go back to, I'm still stuck on how this
sub-spec parts were even allowed at the very beginning of the process. So in that regard, the production part approval process that they go through and they do the testing, would that 2002 PPAP package be a key document in this investigation?
It certainly would be something I'd want to see. I think we sought it out. I don't think we ever found it. And we've asked Delphi for it, and we don't have it.
And Delphi wouldn't produce it?
They informed us they don't have it.
They don't have. Do you believe that?
I can only report what they told us. We made requests from them from the very beginning for access to any and all documents relating to this matter. What they produced to us were a limited number of documents, which were documents that had actually been exchanged with us. At least initially, I think we may have received a few additional documents over the time, but that's what we got.
So no one's been able to locate the PPAP on the ignition parts?
That's my understanding.
Ms. Barra, do you know whether or not the PPAP for this ignition parts from 2002 exist?
I don't. I believe Mr. Valukas and his team would have found it if it does exist. But what I can tell you is the part should have never been put in production.
Agree. And I'm proud you said that, but it would have been great to discover that in 2002 during the PPAP process. And the fact that it wasn't is disturbing in itself, and that's why I think those documents are extremely important, as you do, Mr. Valukas. Should this committee consider a subpoena of those records, since they were not produced, even though...
You put me where I cannot go. The committee is going to conduct its investigation. Let me say this, and I think this is important. It is clear, at least from our fact-finding, that Mr. DeGiorgio approved this part. Yes. And he approved this part knowing it was well below specifications, and we did not find anybody else who was involved in it, though Delphi certainly knew that the part that was being approved was below.
And in that respect, you have this folder binder by you, and if you would turn to tab 4, and it is a memo from Raymond DeGiorgio regarding the talc issue. Now, this is an email from around April 2002. It's around the time the original switch was actually being approved. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the subject here is GMX 357 talc issue for the Saturn Ion, correct?
Correct.
And that talc, what role does the talc testing have on the approval of the switch? Do you know?
It's part of the process. It's how the feel, as it's been explained to me, how does it feel when you make the turn? You know, they wanted to make it feel like it was a European sports car or something like that.
Well, does this email from Raymond DeGiorgio to Raymond DeGiorgio, the answer from Mr. Reinecke, does that raise any concerns to you as the investigator, particularly the sentence that Mr. Reinecke did not find spring back from crank run to accessory as Terry Meehan and others had observed?
No.
Were you aware of these discussions around the time of the switch approval about the feel of that ignition switch?
Yes.
Okay. In the last 30 seconds, you mentioned that there was an adversarial feeling regarding between NHTSA and GM. Have you concluded whether who's responsible for the adversarial relationship?
No, I have not. What I just noted from the documents, and this was not from testimony, more from the documents, just the tone of the documents, and that's maybe an incorrect way to assume something, but that from the tone of the documents it suggested that there was some nature of adversarial activity here.
Do you, if One quick last question. There were many times looking through the documents that under the TREAD Act, GM should have provided notice to NHTSA. Is this adversarial relationship between the two impact their decision not to provide that notice?
No. When I say no, let me explain what we did, and someone else will make that judgment, in a different context. We went back through all of the disclosures, the TREAD Act disclosures, to look to see whether something was or was not disclosed, and at least as best we could tell, marking those disclosures, what the information which was then in possession by virtue of the interviews or documents we had, it appeared to us that the TREAD disclosures were compliant. But I will not be the ultimate judge of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the additional time.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. And now Ms. DeGette and I will have a final 5 minutes wrap up. Ms. DeGette, rectifies 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Valukas, I wanted to follow up on a couple questions Mr. Johnson was asking you. Your report says on page 2, quote, GM engineers concluded that moving stalls were not safety issues because drivers could still maneuver the cars. As a result, GM personnel viewed the switch problem as a customer convenience issue, something annoying but not particularly problematic, as opposed to the safety defect it was. Is that right?
Correct.
And you told Mr. Johnson, so therefore, because they called it a customer convenience issue, they looked at issues of pricing and issues like that, not issues of safety. Is that right?
That is correct.
And this was despite the fact that really pretty early on, GM started getting a lot of complaints about the ignition shifting into neutral and the car losing all power. Is that right?
That is correct.
In fact, there was in a review of the Cobalt in the New York Times, in a review in the New York Times, the freelance writer said that his test Cobalt driven by his wife stalled after her knee bumped the steering column, right?
There were reports in the New York Times and other newspapers.
And Cleveland Plain Dealer and others. And so I find this kind of boggles my mind. A car could be going down the highway at a high rate of speed, 65 miles an hour, and it gets bumped, it goes into neutral, and then everything stops. The power steering, the brakes, the airbags. That's what happened to Brooke Melton, where she's driving down the highway in Hiram, Georgia on her 29th birthday. The ignition stops, the car loses power, she goes into the other lane, and she's killed. Do you know about that case?
I know about that case. Yeah. I certainly do.
And so yet the GM engineer said that this was a convenience issue, right?
They not only said it internally, they said it publicly. When they were interviewed by the press, they said this is our position, that a stall does not constitute a safety issue, and that was one of the...
I mean, that's just insane, isn't it?
It is... I won't use the word insane, but
okay.
I'm troubled by that.
Yeah, okay, good. Now, at the same time, GM was talking to NHTSA about whether stalling was a safety risk. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware there were those conversations throughout this period of time.
Now, Ms. Barra, were you aware that at the same time NHTSA was talking to GM in June 2004 that General Motors recalled 15,000 Oldsmobile Bravadas and Envoys because of stalling risks?
I was not involved in that area.
So you're not aware of that? Now, well, Gay Kent signed that notice, and was Gay Kent reporting to you at that time?
No.
Okay. Did Gay Kent ever express any concern to you about the stalling and safety risks from the ions and cobalts?
No.
Okay. So basically, what you're saying in your report, Mr. Valukas, is you have these cars that stall out at any speed, really, and all of the power goes out, but yet the GM personnel maintain this was a customer convenience issue.
That is where they were, absolutely, from 2005 through 2009 at least.
Okay. Now, have you ever talked to a fellow named Clarence Ditlow, who's with the Center for Auto Safety?
I've received correspondence from him.
Did you receive this letter dated June 17, 2014 from him?
Packet?
I'm sorry?
Is it in the material that just given?
I don't know, but we can hand you a copy. Yes, we'll hand you a copy. And Mr. Ditlow's conclusion is that the Valukas report is clearly flawed in accepting GM's explanation that its engineers and senior managers did not know stalling was safety related. Are you aware of this claim that Mr. Ditlow made?
I am aware of this claim. Actually, I know I read this letter, and I sent him back a nice note saying thank you for the information.
And what's your view of that?
My view is that he didn't read the report and understand what my responsibility was here. If you ask my view, let me give my view. What we were charged to do, and I think this is very important to understand, we were charged by the Board of Directors to find the facts concerning how and why this occurred. We were charged with laying those facts before the Board, and we were charged with making recommendations. And the Board was charged with the responsibility, I presume, of making decisions whether or not the employees within the organization to the top level lived up to their responsibilities. That was where the Board's responsibility was. So the suggestions in here that, you know, we didn't cover up people or we didn't that we exonerated certain people, it's just simply not correct.
Mr. Valukas, I really appreciate that answer because you clearly delineated what you were hired to do, and you believe you were hired to do that, correct?
That is correct.
Now, so there may be other information that this committee needs to gather beyond your report, right?
That is
And
absolutely possible, and as I said before, if we found new information as we went along, which reflected on, we would share it.
You will share it with this committee,
Share it with the
correct?
Board, and I presume.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to place this June 17th letter into the record, and also a report by the American Association for Justice entitled Driven to Safety from June 2014, talking about some of the lawsuits that we have involved in this.
And without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for coming, both of you, today.
Thank you. Dr. Burgess wanted to make that follow-up question about the phone number.
The unanimous consent request, since I brought it up, to put into the record 1-800-222-1020 as the customer service number that should be available to customers of General Motors. And also just the observation, we are talking about the non-deployment of an airbag, which is a supplemental restraint system. The primary restraint system is the seat belt, and I do encourage people, you got to wear your seat belts when you drive on the highways. And I'll yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for a final 5 minutes here. I just want to be clear, Mr. Valukas, so when you said when you get additional data, and it was very clear in your mandate from Ms. Barra that she wanted this to be thorough, basically no stones unturned, that if you receive that other information from plaintiffs' attorneys, I hope you'll share that with us. You said that they had not responded to you as of yet, but if there is information that they have with regard to delays from General Motors attorneys in getting them information, I hope you will review that and let us know.
And to be clear, because of my responsibilities here, I will gather that information. Whatever we do, we'd have to share with the Board of Directors. They will make the decision as to disclosure, but in this instance, they have made those decisions up to this point. So,
thank you. Ms. Barr, a couple points I want to make sure we're now, with the benefit of time, we recognize. The Cobalt and several other automobiles had a defective switch. That switch, for a couple of reasons, hitting a pothole, a bump, bumping the key ring with your knee, or a heavy key fob, could have moved that on switch into an accessory position, correct? Caused a stalling of the vehicle, subsequent loss of power steering and power brakes when the engine was not on, and also the airbags would not deploy. All those things are clear, right? On page 8 of Mr. Valukas' report, there's reference to a technical service bulletin from 2005. And it says in here that the technical service bulletin counsel customers remove heavy items from their key rings, offered an insert to the key that would reduce the likelihood that the ignition switch would rotate inadvertently. That bulletin did not refer to the problem as, quote, stalling, unquote. However, precisely because General Motors believed customers might associate stalling with a safety problem, and only a customer who had already experienced a stall who came to a dealer to complain would get information about the proposed solutions. Other customers would remain unaware of the problem, as well as GM's proposed solutions. I'm assuming that if you knew then what you knew now, you would not have allowed that sort of bulletin to be written in that way?
That is correct.
Thank you. Now, I want to, however, refer to something that is taking place today, which it's important you know. That is, I took a look at the GM current website with regard to the safety recall. Your comments are on your speech, et cetera. And I go to the section marked Frequently Asked Questions. Under the item number 7, are the recalled vehicles safe to drive? You say, the simple answer to that question is yes. The GM engineers have done extensive analysis to make sure if you use only the ignition key with no additional items in the key ring, that the vehicle is safe to drive.
And that is true. We've validated that. It's also been validated by NHTSA.
The old Cobalts that could also go into a stall.
We're talking about as long as you have just the key or the ring, you don't end up having the moment and you don't have an ability to trap it with your knee, that condition is not going to occur. That's what that statement is referring to.
They still could not hit it with their knee. Okay.
The issue is when you look at just the key, you don't create a moment to be able to do that.
But still, what it does not say at all in this statement, customer, if you don't do this, your car may stall, you may lose power steering, you may lose your brakes, you won't have your airbag. This is an extreme safety concern. It simply says this isn't a big safety deal. And then you even say once the service repair is completed, can customers put a heavy key ring back on? You say, well, we recommend only utilize the key ring, and key fob if equipped that came with the vehicle. So you say if you repair this with the previous item that I just quoted, if you repair this, you'll be fine. And later on you say, but don't change the key issue. So I don't understand how that is fixed.
Well, first of all, on the FAQ, the frequently asked question they're referring to, there's a number of questions, and there was also opening statements. I know I personally recorded videos that we have on our website to truly communicate what we need to do. It's been included in our letters. So I think you have to look at the complete communication, not one question. Oh, okay.
But my point is this. I'm making recommendations to you. You've come before a committee, and I believe you've been trying to be honest and straightforward. My recommendation to you is there are, how many Cobalts still out there? How many Ions? How many other cars are affected by this?
Something less than 2.6 million.
2.6 million. And so far, I forget how many you've said on your website have been repaired.
Almost 200,000.
Hundreds? Okay. That's a lot of cars out there that could still stall. You lose power steering. You lose power brakes. You could lose control of the car. You could crash. Your airbags won't deploy. And some will be injured or die. I hope that that becomes a lot more glaring than simply having to go through and says, you know, it's safe to drive. I don't think it's safe to drive.
Congressman Murphy, we have sent letters. We have gone on social media. I've done videos. Our dealers have been informed. We've done special training sessions. Believe me, we take it very seriously, and we want people to know that until their vehicle is repaired, that we want them to only use the key and the ring. We have done extensive communications because I don't want any other incidents to occur.
Ma'am, I hear what you've done. I'm talking about what I would recommend you still do. Look, the unfortunate thing about this is that with all the things that you do, like in our lives too, all the things we do to try to communicate with people, many times people don't read mail, they don't watch commercials on TV, they don't look at things like this, and so you have to try all levels in that. It isn't until it maybe gets on a comedy network or something that people pay attention. I would highly recommend that what you do in this situation is make it very clear that if you don't do this, this is a consequence. I would hope that that would be something GM would make abundantly clear, because I may not know a lot about it, but I know it, as a psychologist, what motivates people. And if you give them the bold, blasting facts, if you don't do this, you could be in a serious accident. That might wake up people to understand that in order for GM to work on safety, customers have to pay attention to this too. And I hope that that's something that people across America will pay attention to. As I said before, I thought this report could be subtitled, Don't Assume Malfeasance When Incompetence Will Do. There's more to it than that. We all have to take responsibility. And I see this as something that I still hope GM does more with communication.
We'll redouble our efforts there.
Thank you. I now want to say I ask unanimous consent that the members' written opening statements be introduced in the record, and without objection, those documents will be entered into the record. And I ask unanimous consent that the document binder from this hearing be entered into the record subject to appropriate redactions by staff. In conclusion, I want to thank the witnesses today and the members that participated in today's hearing. I remind members they have 10 business days to submit questions to the record, and I ask that the witnesses all agree to respond promptly to questions. And with that, I adjourn this hearing. Okay.